Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Bobby Ann McLeod. Bobby Ann lived with her parents, Donna and Adrian, and her brother Lee in Plymouth, a lively coastal town in southwest England. On November 20th, 2021, Bobby Ann left her home around 5:45 p.m., heading to the bus stop on Sheepstore Road. She had told her father that she was going downtown to meet her boyfriend and friends, something she had done many times before. The bus stop was familiar to her, and she reached it within a few minutes. An hour and a half passed, and Bobby Ann's mother, Donna, sent her a text to check if she had arrived safely. When Bobby Ann didn't reply, Donna tried calling her, but her daughter also didn't answer. This was unusual, and Donna became worried. About an hour later, Bobby Ann's boyfriend called her parents, asking if she was at home. He was concerned because Bobby Ann hadn't shown up for their scheduled meeting, and he hadn't been able to reach her by phone. Bobby Ann's parents called all her friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. With growing concern, they reported her missing to the police. It was already past 9 p.m. The next morning, November 21st, police along with McLeod's family and volunteers began a thorough search of the area. Flyers with Bobby Ann's picture were distributed across the city, and her disappearance was shared on social media and local news outlets. Bobby Ann's brother, Lee, made a desperate plea on social media, urging everyone in Plymouth to help search for her. He asked people to report any information or sightings to him. The police investigation revealed that Bobby Ann had planned to take a bus downtown, but she never boarded it. However, a local resident came forward, stating that he had seen Bobby Ann at the bus stop the previous evening. This new information confirms that Bobby Ann did indeed arrive at the bus stop but did not get on the bus for unknown reasons. Further evidence was found when police discovered Bobby Ann's wireless headphones in the walkway behind the bus stop. The area was sealed off, and police officers conducted a meticulous search of the surrounding area, scouring every inch for potential clues. Evidence was collected along the girl's usual route from her home to the bus stop, as well as on surrounding streets. Since Bobby Ann was last seen at the bus stop but never boarded the bus, and her headphones were found nearby, authorities suspected she might have been kidnapped. Investigators attempted to locate her cell phone, which was detected within the city limits, but they couldn't pinpoint its exact location. All calls to her number went straight to voicemail. The police eventually found Bobby Ann's phone. On November 22nd, police, family members, and volunteers conducted a thorough search of the area surrounding Bobby Ann's home, but unfortunately, no leads were found. The following evening, November 23rd, the police announced the discovery of a woman's body at Bavazan Beach, approximately 8 miles from the bus stop where Bobby Ann was last seen. The body was found in a wooded area near the shore, about half a mile inland. The body found was indeed Bobby Ann's. Her death was a devastating blow to her loved ones. A vigil was held in her memory near the bus stop where she was last seen, and the family expressed their gratitude to everyone who attended. During the vigil, Bobby Ann's mother, Donna, sent heartfelt love to her daughter. On behalf of her family, she expressed gratitude to everyone for coming together during this difficult time. She admits that although their beautiful Bobby Ann's life was taken, she will always be remembered. Bobby Ann McLeod's brother, Lee McLeod, paid a heartfelt tribute to his sister by sharing a childhood photo of the two of them. The picture showed the siblings smiling and wearing their primary school uniforms. In a message accompanying the photo, Lee expressed his grief and love for his sister. He wrote, "You didn't deserve this. You were a beautiful and talented girl, and I'm grateful to have had you as my little sister. I'll always treasure the adventures and journeys we had. Rest easy now." The police investigation revealed that Bobby Ann's body was found naked, but the medical examiner found no evidence of rape. However, she had suffered severe head and facial injuries, including 14 lacerations. The investigation has made progress. A man who walked into the police station on November 23rd, the same day the body was found. At 1:17 p.m., he approached the police and offered to provide information about the missing girl, stating that he wanted to help the police and her family. That man was Cody Ackland, 24, admitted to the crime. He confessed to kidnapping and killing Bobby Ann, providing details of the offense. Cody lived fairly close to the bus stop where Bobby Ann was last seen, and he was taken into custody as the prime suspect. Cody confirmed that he had abducted Bobby Ann from the bus stop, despite never having met her before the evening of the incident. Cody Ackland was a talented musician and guitarist in a local indie rock band, but he had a dark secret. Behind his charming facade, Cody was fascinated with serial killers and had a list of idols that included notorious murderers such as Joseph D'Angelo Jr., Andre Chikatilo, Ivan Milat, Fred West, and Tommy Sells. However, he worshipped a criminal he considered a hero, Ted Bundy, who confessed to killing at least 30 people. Cody's obsession with Ted was evident in the content he consumed. Investigators found 3,216 images on his phone, many of which were disturbing and reminiscent of horror movies. In the lead-up to a young girl named Bobby Ann's death, Cody's internet searches became increasingly focused on serial killers and crimes. He also researched remote locations on Dartmoor, potential weapons, and browsed online stores for items such as baseball bats, ski masks, and waterproof clothing. However, his clandestine activities eventually led him to commit a serious crime. In a tragic twist of fate, Bobby Ann unknowingly crossed paths with Cody. On the evening of the incident, Bobby Ann arrived at the bus stop around 6:15 p.m. Cody, who was driving his Ford Fiesta in the area, spotted her and decided to target her. According to Cody's own confession, Bobby Ann's resemblance to his ex-girlfriend was merely a coincidence and not the reason for the attack. In reality, Cody had been planning to carry out a violent act for some time and was simply looking for a victim. The police investigation concluded that Cody would have carried out his plan regardless of who he encountered, Coombe Lane. Despite a thorough search, the hammer was never found. On November 21st, Cody spent the day socializing with friends, attending a pizza gathering, a band rehearsal, and a night out at the pub. Those who saw him that day noticed he was in an unusually good mood, happy, joking, and affectionate with his friends. The following day, November 22nd, Cody continued to enjoy himself, buying popcorn and watching a movie at the theater. Meanwhile, police, family, and volunteers were searching for Bobby Ann, and Cody was keeping up with the latest news on his phone. On November 23rd, Cody went to work at a car service company. During his lunch break, he sent a message to a chat room for his music group, expressing his love for them, and also texted his mother to tell her how much he loved her. Shortly after, he went to the police station and confessed to the crime. Shortly after, Cody's band members have issued a statement on Facebook announcing that they are disbanding the group with immediate effect as a mark of respect for the late Bobby Ann McLeod. They expressed their shock and disbelief at the tragic events, saying their thoughts and prayers are with Bobby Ann's family and friends, who must be devastated by their loss. The band members explained that they cannot continue as a group and have decided to go their separate ways. They will not be making any further comments at this time. In a separate development, police revealed that they had found physical evidence linking Cody to the crime scene. This included Bobby Ann's DNA in his car and on his sneakers. The trial of Cody Ackland took place in May 2022. Cody's attorney, Ray Tully, stated that psychiatrists had evaluated Cody and found that he did not have a mental illness. However, Cody had experienced a difficult childhood and had been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety. By the age of 19, Cody had a 7-year history of depression. Ray explained that Cody had not received much support or comfort from his family or school life. Specifically, Cody's father had not provided him with the guidance and support he needed. During sentencing, Judge Robert Linford told Cody that his actions were premeditated and the case of Jassy Correa. Jassy Correa was born in Praia, Cabo Verde, but her family moved to the United States when she was just 3 years old. She grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and Boston became her hometown. As she grew older, Jassy became a loving mother to her daughter, Gabriella. However, Jassy's personal life was marred by difficulties. Jassy's husband, Miguel Castro, physically attacked her. Despite wanting to leave him, Miguel refused to let her go and severely beat her. Jassy eventually reported the incident to the police, and Miguel was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Jassy worked as a waitress at Del Frisco, a Boston restaurant. In her free time, she enjoyed dancing and photography. She cherished moments spent with her family, friends, and daughter, Gabriella. One of her favorite activities was taking her little daughter to the park. On the evening of February 23, 2019, Jassy celebrated her birthday with friends at Venue, a nightclub in Boston's Theater District. Before heading out, she left her 2-year-old daughter with her family and got ready for a night out, wearing a new orange jumpsuit. They had spent the evening dancing and drinking champagne at a nightclub. When the club closed, Jassy and her 2 friends stepped outside, but they eventually went their separate ways, leaving Jassy alone. She never made it home that night, and her phone was turned off, with all calls going straight to voicemail. For 2 days, Sunday and Monday, there was no news from Jassy. No one had seen her since she left the nightclub on Sunday morning. On Tuesday, February 26th, Jassy's father, Juan Correa, and one of Jassy's friends went to the police station to report her disappearance. The police immediately launched an investigation. The detectives' first priority was to determine where Jassy went after leaving the nightclub. Jassy's family and friends distributed flyers around the city, hoping someone might have information about her whereabouts. The detectives also interviewed Jassy's friends who were with her that night, but they didn't know where she had gone after leaving the club. According to her friends, Jassy had planned to head home after saying goodbye. To gather more information, the police interviewed witnesses and reviewed CCTV footage from cameras inside and outside the nightclub. One recording showed Jassy on the sidewalk on Tremont Street, near the nightclub, talking to several people at 2:14 a.m. This was after she had left the club. The footage revealed that Jassy, who appeared to be intoxicated, mistakenly got into an Uber she hadn't ordered. The driver, unhappy about the mix-up, argued with her and eventually pushed her out of the vehicle. After being forced out of the car, Jassy continued to argue with the driver. That's when an unknown man approached her and took her hand, pulling her aside to talk. Despite possibly wanting to leave, Jassy was unable to free herself from his grasp. The CCTV footage showed the man, still holding Jassy's hands, pulling her closer. Eventually, Jassy left the area with him. In hindsight, it's clear that she had fallen prey to a predator who took advantage of her vulnerable state. The next camera footage showed Jassy jumping onto his back, and he carried her to his car. They drove away together. 14 minutes later, the police had many questions to answer. Who was this man, and where had he taken Jassy? Fortunately, they quickly identified the man and located his address. Louis Coleman, a 32-year-old man from a good family background, was with Jassy at the time of the incident. He had earned a master's degree in physics and had no prior record with the law. Notably, there was no information in the police database about Louis owning a car. However, his mother, a resident of California, was the owner of a 2016 red Buick, which matched the type of vehicle involved in the incident with Jassy. Louis lived in Providence, Rhode Island, about 50 miles from the venue nightclub where he was last seen with Jassy. When police arrived at his home, they found that Lewis was no longer there. However, CCTV footage from inside and outside the building revealed disturbing evidence. It's worth noting that the drive from the venue club to Lewis's apartment typically takes about an hour. Since Lewis returned to his apartment at 4:15 a.m. on Sunday, approximately 2 hours after he was seen leaving with Jassy, it's likely that he stopped somewhere along the way. The next day, Lewis sent an email to his colleague stating that he would be taking a few more days off. Based on the content of the email, it appears that Lewis was trying to buy time to cover his tracks. Over the next 2 days, Lewis attempted to conceal evidence of the crime. Further CCTV footage analysis sheds light on what happened to Jassy after she left with Lewis. Although the police never released the initial footage due to ethical concerns, it showed Lewis entering his apartment building with Jassy. FBI Special Agent Thomas Zukus described the footage as follows. Lewis was seen walking from a red sedan towards the front of the building, carrying a body with long hair and orange pants. Agent Zukus believes that this footage shows Lewis carrying Jassy's body into his apartment building. According to Zukus, security footage from the building's lobby reveals that at approximately 4:27 a.m., Lewis entered the building carrying an unconscious or already deceased Jassy in his arms. He proceeded to the elevator and took it to the 6th floor. Notably, on February 26th, the same day Jassy's father reported her disappearance to the police, Lewis made a suspicious purchase at Walmart. His receipt shows he bought multiple items that raise red flags, including protective suits, duct tape, electrical tape, candles, gloves, safety goggles, a mask, and Clorox bleach. The next day, while friends and family distributed flyers with Jassy's picture, Lewis made another concerning purchase at Walmart, caught on camera at 9:22 p.m. This time, he bought a large suitcase and a canister. On February 27, 2019, at around 9:58 p.m., Lewis returned to the apartment building, and video footage appears to show him carrying the newly purchased large suitcase. Further footage captures Lewis taking the suitcase from his apartment to his vehicle in the parking lot, as evidenced by a recording at 2:15 a.m. on February 28. A video shows a man, later identified as Lewis, struggling to lift a suitcase into the trunk of his car. This footage is part of a larger investigation into the disappearance of Jassy Correa, who was last seen on February 24 and was believed to be at Lewis's apartment. Between 2:44 a.m. and 4:02 a.m., Lewis was seen leaving the building multiple times, carrying various items including cardboard boxes, trash bags, a bottle of bleach, a computer tower, a laptop case, and a small duffel bag. On February 28, 2019, police obtained a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. During their search, they found several suspicious items, including 2 packages of hooded coveralls and 2 respirator masks. They also examined a sofa in the apartment, which was missing one of its 4 large cushions. Outside the apartment complex, in a dumpster, police found a collection of items that raised further suspicions. These included white trash bags, a bag containing plastic sheets, men's jeans with bleach stains, and the belt. Additional items found in the dumpster included a white nylon hooded coverall, an unfilled box of baking soda, clear safety goggles, duct tape packaging, rubbing alcohol, Walmart bags, used plastic gloves, an empty package from a car air freshener, 3 used packages of purifying charcoal, and a sponge. On the afternoon of February 28, 2019, police stopped a car driven by Lewis near Wilmington, Delaware. Officers ordered Lewis to exit the vehicle and asked if he was alone. Lewis reportedly responded by saying, "She's in the trunk." When police investigated, they found the body of Jassy wrapped in a sofa cushion cover inside a black trash bag, which was placed in a large suitcase that matched the one Lewis had taken into his apartment the previous day. Experts who inspected the car found 2 cracks on the passenger side windshield, leading police to suspect that the man had attacked Jassy inside the vehicle. As a result, Lewis was arrested and taken to a Delaware State Police barracks. During questioning, Lewis had a large bandage on the right side of his face, which he claimed was from sheet when asked about it. A forensic examination revealed that Jassy died from a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma. Additionally, seminal fluid was found on her body, and DNA analysis matched Lewis's DNA. Prosecutors noted that Lewis's DNA was also found under Jassy's fingertips. Although the exact location of Jassy's death could not be determined, it is believed to have occurred either in the car or at Lewis's apartment. On Saturday, March 9, 2019, family and community members gathered at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester to pay their respects to Jassy Correa. Many wore white or displayed buttons, shirts, and sweatshirts with Jassy's face and the phrase, "Justice for Jassy." Maka DeAndrade, Jassy's cousin and best friend, delivered the first eulogy, expressing the community's sadness and acceptance of Jassy's passing. DeAndrade said, "We may not understand why Jassy's life was cut short, but I have faith that her death was not in vain. I trust that God has a plan, and I have faith in that." Boston Mayor Marty Walsh addressed the crowd, vowing to work towards creating a safer world for women. He emphasized that young women should be able to go out and celebrate without fear and return home safely to their loved ones. He acknowledged the immense pain Jassy Correa's family has endured and expressed his condolences. When Correa expressed gratitude to the city and law enforcement agencies for their tireless efforts in investigating Jassy's disappearance and death. He also paid a heartfelt tribute to his daughter, saying, "Rest in paradise, my dear Jassy, rest in peace, my dear child." Lewis Coleman, the suspect, has been charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a crime that could carry the death penalty or a life sentence. However, prosecutors have announced that they will not seek capital punishment. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence, including a video of Coleman dragging Jassy's body into his apartment and his online search history following her disappearance. FBI agents reported on Lewis's online activity in the days following the alleged kidnapping. He searched for topics such as whether a person can fit inside a suitcase and how to remove a tooth that is not loose. However, Lewis's defense team has disputed the relevance of this evidence to the kidnapping charge. They argue that the prosecution's focus has been on Lewis's actions after the alleged victim's death, rather than on the kidnapping itself. Attorney David stated, "This case is not about how Lewis behaved after her death, or whether he did anything illegal or inappropriate. The government's evidence has mainly centered on these issues, but I believe they are not crucial to determining whether a kidnapping occurred." Court documents filed by the prosecution and defense provide a detailed account of the events surrounding Jassy Correa's disappearance and death. Although they sides present different versions of what happened, the documents reveal disturbing details about the circumstances leading up to Jassy's death. Prosecutors established that the defendant, Lewis, was at the same nightclub as Jassy and her friends on the night of her disappearance. However, Lewis was interacting with a different woman he had just met, not Jassy. They exchanged phone numbers and texted each other while at the club and after it closed. The prosecution and defense have presented conflicting narratives about the events that unfolded. Prosecutors argue that Jassy was not the aggressor and that Lewis deceived her into getting into his car by offering her a ride to her friend's apartment, ultimately taking her life. In contrast, the defense claims that Jassy became aggressive after being pushed out of an Uber by the driver, and that she initiated a fight with Lewis. The defense argues that the crime was a spontaneous altercation rather than a premeditated act of stalking, kidnapping, and murder. Prosecutors pointed out that the defendant's main argument was that the victim, who weighed 119 pounds, had attacked the defendant, who weighed 200 pounds. However, this claim was not convincing, especially considering that the victim's autopsy revealed the presence of multiple prohibited substances in her body, in addition to alcohol. The defense team attempted to minimize their client's involvement in the crime. Despite this, in June 2022, Lewis was found guilty of one count of kidnapping resulting in death. The defense team then filed a motion arguing that the evidence was insufficient to support the conviction, but this motion did not change the outcome of the trial. In October 2022, Lewis Coleman, 36, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for kidnapping and killing Jesse Core. The court also ordered him to pay $60,000 in compensation to the victim's family. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born on December 3, 1999, in Temuco, Chile, to a wealthy family. She was the youngest of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. Antonia was particularly close to Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Her parents valued education and encouraged their children to pursue their interests, including sports and music. As the youngest child, Antonia was especially loved and spoiled by her parents. Despite this, she was a diligent student and dreamed of studying tourism and traveling the world. At the age of 15, Antonia met Martín Predines on social media in 2015. Martín was 8 years older than Antonia and lived in the same city. He was divorced and had a child from a previous marriage. Little is known about Martín's early life, except that he was born in February 1992 in Temuco to Ivan Pronis and Paula Dare. When Martín was 20, he got a girl from his school pregnant, and to avoid scandal and punishment, he married her. However, the marriage ended shortly after the birth of their child. Martín and Antonia were acquaintances who knew each other from socializing with young people on social networks between 2015 and 2017. However, their relationship remained purely platonic. After Antonia graduated from high school and enrolled in university, she relocated to a different city, and they lost touch. At university, Antonia focused on her studies in the travel industry, formed new friendships, and explored new hobbies. Martín was no longer on her mind. During her breaks from university, Antonia would return to her hometown but primarily stayed in touch with her family, including her parents and siblings. During her time at university, Antonia developed a close bond with a fellow student named Consuela Herb, and they became nearly inseparable. She also started a romantic relationship with a student named Rodrigo Aguad, which lasted for approximately a year. However, they got into a dispute at the beginning of the new semester in September 2019 and decided to take a break from each other. Antonio had recently gone through a breakup and was feeling down. Luckily, the Chilean national holiday was just around the corner, offering a long weekend and a chance to take her mind off things. She and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the charming town of Pucón. They carpooled with 3 classmates, using Consuela's car. As it happened, close friends of Antonio's family owned a summer house in Pucón, and since the owners were out of town, they kindly offered Antonio and her friend the use of their house, even providing them with the spare key. Upon arrival, the group split up, and they friends settled into the spacious and cozy house, looking forward to a relaxing weekend getaway. On the evening of September 18th, Antonia ran into Martine while walking around the city, and they struck up a conversation. As it turned out, Martine was also in town for the festival with his friends and was staying in a large rented house just outside the city center. They hit it off and made plans to meet up the next day at a party at a popular nightclub. Antonia called her parents to fill them in on her plans, and her father warned her to be careful and not to drink too much. Antonia laughed it off and promised to be responsible. The next day, Antonia and her friends spent hours getting ready for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup. Before heading out, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. When they arrived, they ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar and drank it together before hitting the dance floor. It was after midnight when Martine and his friends arrived at the club. Antonia was already quite drunk by then, but she continued to drink and dance with Martine. According to her friend, Consuela, Antonia was advised to slow down, but she didn't listen. At one point, Consuela lost track of Antonia and spent half an hour searching for her. When she finally found her, Antonia was in another room with Martine, barely able to stand due to her intoxication. Consuela saw her classmate Benjamin Morales at the club and asked for his help in getting her friend Antonia home. However, Antonia refused to leave, saying the night was still young. A short while later, she started to feel unwell, and her friends took her outside for some fresh air. After she felt a bit better, she returned to the club. Consuela went to Antonia later that night and told her that she was exhausted and ready to head home. However, Antonia declined, wanting to stay and continue having fun. Consuela then left the club, giving up on convincing Antonia to leave with her. She took a taxi home and went straight to bed. Benjamin saw Martine escorting Antonia out of the club, holding her because she was swaying from side to side. According to Benjamin, Antonia was too drunk to fight back, and Martine took advantage of her state. They waited near the entrance for a while, allowing Antonia to recover a bit. Soon, Martine's friends arrived and suggested they continue partying at their rented house. The company ordered a taxi, but Martine and Antonia decided to walk, as she was unwell and disoriented. Surveillance cameras captured their walk, showing the man supporting a drunk student who was trying to break free from his grasp. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket, where Martine purchased beer. Inside the empty store, Martine attempted to kiss she, but she pushed him away and turned her back on him. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but her intoxication left her unable to resist or escape. Martine, being stronger, continued to lead Antonia, and they eventually arrived at the rented house around 8 a.m. The people in the living room saw that she was upset, but she was too drunk to clearly communicate her distress. Despite Antonia's obvious unease, Martine continued to hug and try to kiss her. The other friends, also heavily intoxicated, failed to intervene. Eventually, they retreated to a bedroom, where the man assaulted she while she was in a dazed state. Antonia was confused and disoriented as Martine ignored her attempts to resist and stop him. After the incident, he rejoined his friends in the living room and continued the party, leaving Antonia alone in the bedroom. Later, around 9 a.m., she managed to call Benjamin, but her speech was slurred and she was crying uncontrollably, making it hard for him to understand her. She was unable to explain what had happened or where she was. Benjamin became concerned and called Consuela, telling her that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Antonia then called Consuela herself, struggling to communicate, and eventually found out her location, prompting Consuela to go to her aid. When Consuela met Martine at the doorstep, she asked him what had happened, but he just smiled and claimed that everything was consensual. However, when Consuela found her friend, Antonia, in one of the rooms, she was shocked by her condition. Antonia was crying and begged to be taken away from the place as soon as possible. They left shortly after and went home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite her friend's advice to preserve the evidence and report the incident to the police, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out what had happened. She tried to act normally when she spoke to her parents later that day, hiding her true emotions. The next morning, Antonia and her friends returned to the student dormitory. In the aftermath, Antonia struggled to cope with the trauma. She tried to forget the nightmare and resume her normal life, attending classes and socializing with friends. However, only Consuela noticed that Antonia was not okay. As time passed, Antonia's mental state deteriorated, and she gradually fell into a deep depression. Antonia was traumatized and didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened to her. She refused to file a police report, fearing that it would only spread the news and make things worse. However, rumors about her began to circulate quickly. They would whisper, point, and laugh at her. One of her classmates even had the audacity to ask her about the rumors in front of everyone. However, what sent Antonia over the edge was a phone call from Rodrigo, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had strong feelings and had been holding on to the hope of rekindling their relationship. During the call, Rodrigo repeated all the rumors he had heard and told Antonia that he never wanted to see her again. Antonia broke down in tears, trying to defend herself and explain that the rumors were not true. But Rodrigo was unforgiving, using derogatory language to describe her and calling her promiscuous before hanging up. This conversation was devastating for Antonia, and she couldn't cope with the emotional pain. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia went to her parents' house, seeking comfort and solace with her family. Concern for Antonia's well-being grew as her relatives noticed a deep sadness in her eyes, despite her claims that everything was okay. Later that evening, she posted old childhood photos on social media, accompanied by a distressing message. The following day, after dinner with her family, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor. Her sister Catalina checked on her about an hour later, but Antonia asked to be left alone, saying she wanted to sleep. Catalina granted her wish, turned off the light, and bid her a loving goodbye before leaving the room. 2 hours passed before their mother, Marcela, came to Antonia's room to announce that dinner was ready. After knocking on the door with no response, Marcela entered the room and initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Devastated, Marcela screamed for help, and the rest of the household rushed to the room. In a state of panic, they called for emergency services while attempting to revive Antonia on their own before medical professionals arrived. Antonia's situation had become hopeless, and she tragically took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. The investigation into her death and the first attempts to hold the perpetrator accountable began. The news shocked her family and friends, as many were unaware of the severe emotional distress Antonia had been experiencing. As Antonia's parents sought to understand what had happened to their daughter, they spoke with her friends and classmates. They were shocked by the rumors and gossip that had been circulating about Antonia. Consuela, in particular, shared everything she knew, but the parents felt that more needed to be done. They hired a top private detective to help reconstruct the events leading up to Antonia's death and gather evidence to bring the person responsible to justice. Alejandro, determined to seek justice for his daughter, used his connections to organize a press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he shared the devastating truth: his daughter had been the victim of forced bullying, which she had been unable to survive. The person responsible, he emphasized, remained at large. The detective reconstructed the timeline of events from that fateful night and gathered statements from several key witnesses, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students, who were willing to testify in court. With all the evidence collected, the Antonia family petitioned the court to arrest and prosecute Martín for his actions. However, the police determined that the evidence presented was insufficient to warrant taking him into custody. Martin claimed that everything that happened was consensual, although he admitted that both parties were intoxicated. Furthermore, the victim did not report the incident to the police. As a result, Martin remained free, and he and his family subsequently filed a lawsuit against the Antonia family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of their personal information. According to the Martin family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother, Martin. In response, the Martin family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They argued that Martin's reputation had been harmed without justification and presented themselves as the ones who had been wronged. The Martin family also accused Antonia of sharing their personal contact information, including their home address, phone numbers, and social media handles. As a result, Martin and his family received daily insults and anonymous death threats. The Martin family maintained that Martin's guilt had not been proven and that everything had happened by mutual consent. They expressed their willingness to defend Martin's case in court. Surprisingly, after this statement, the police supported the Martin family, causing Antonia's relatives to stop making negative comments about them and to stop sharing personal data. This sudden change was a major blow. This unexpected turn of events was a significant setback. Despite this, Antonia's relatives continued to seek justice with the support of the public. Victims who were initially silent about their experiences began speaking out after Antonia's case gained widespread public attention. Within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, claiming they too had been harassed and assaulted by Martin. They had previously remained silent, fearing they would be condemned and censured. One of the victims was just 13 years old at the time of the assault. As more girls who suffered at the hands of Martin began contacting the police, he was eventually taken into custody. Martin was arrested in June 2020 and held at Tomoko City Prison on suspicion of committing assaults between 2011 and 2019. However, Martin was released on his own recognizance less than a month after his lawyer intervened, and was allowed to remain free for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, several lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations having expired. There was a high likelihood that many cases would be disregarded. Out of 8 appeals, only 2 were registered by the court. The release of Martin from custody and the rejection of the victim's claims sparked widespread outrage. Protests and rallies erupted nationwide, with thousands demanding justice. In response, the prosecutor's office re-examined the case and pushed for a change in Martin's bail conditions, seeking to return him to custody. Meanwhile, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martin. During his trial in February 2021, his social media messages were revealed, in which he boasted about his actions to friends. It was also discovered that Martin kept a collection of his victims' underwear at home, taken as trophies. This collection included items from victims who had previously reported him to the court, as well as a belonging of Antonia's. On August 26, 2021, Martin was charged with 9 counts of crimes involving sexual misconduct. 3 of the victims were minors when the incidents occurred. The Antonia family appealed to the public to speak out against violence and bring those responsible to justice. The trial began in June 2022, allowing Martin's lawyers sufficient time to prepare. They presented witness statements and surveillance footage showing that Antonia left with the defendant voluntarily and did not attempt to resist him. The defense challenged the testimonies of other victims, but in August 2022, the court delivered a guilty verdict against Martin. He was convicted of 8 crimes involving sexual misconduct and causing Antonia's nervous breakdown, which ultimately led to her death. Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his lawyers, led by Pinus, promptly filed an appeal. On December 29, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In March 2023, Martin's case was assigned to the public defender's office. During the new trial, Martin maintained his innocence, attributing the events leading to Antonia's death to the large quantity of alcohol they had consumed together. Despite this, on July 7, 2023, Martin was found guilty again. The court reduced his initial 20-year sentence to 17 years, considering the 3 years he had already spent in prison. He had only 14 years left to serve. However, Antonia's family expressed dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release made by her father. They noted that no punishment could bring back their daughter. During the ongoing lawsuits, Antonia's family and other victims affected by Martin's actions joined forces with public figures to advocate for women's rights. Together, they worked to amend the criminal code, specifically the sections related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to protect the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. The case of Abril Perez. Juan Carlos was an ambitious entrepreneur, born on November 11, 1968. Juan Carlos and Abril discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology, where Abril studied and Juan Carlos earned his degree with high academic achievement. Juan Carlos had also studied at top U.S. universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. With his education and experience, he considered himself a professional entrepreneur in e-commerce and financial technology. Juan and Abril became inseparable, collaborating on projects and socializing in the same friend circle. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance. After a few years of dating, they decided to tie the knot, and their wedding took place in 1994. Their collaboration led to numerous successful projects, including the online stores Pag Mobile and Plascom. They also played a key role in the development of the Dem store, which became a leading e-commerce platform in Mexico. By 1999, their life appeared to be a perfect fairy tale, with both partners achieving great success in their careers and enjoying a happy relationship. Their joy was further amplified with the birth of their first child, Ana Cecilia, in 2001. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., followed by another son, Julio Andres, in 2005. Despite their busy schedules, Abril prioritized her children's needs, taking care of them personally and attending their school activities. Abril's devotion earned her the respect and admiration of those around her. Juan Carlos was also a dedicated father, and together they created a seemingly ideal family that many people envied. However, behind the facade, the family was struggling with difficulties, and all members suffered due to Juan's short temper. Juan was a cruel man who frequently lashed out at anyone who crossed his path. His behavior towards his wife, Abril, began with verbal abuse, making her feel uncomfortable and hurt with his insulting words. Over time, the situation worsened, and Juan started using physical violence against Abril, regularly beating her. Abril attempted to conceal the abuse from her friends and family, fearing that she wouldn't be able to provide for their children on her own. She believed that staying with Juan would give their children a better future. However, by 2009, the situation had become so severe that others began to suspect what was happening in the family. Abril has always kept it a secret from her friends and family, but whenever they asked about a possible divorce, she insisted that she wouldn't leave Juan. By 2014, Juan had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming a prominent figure in Amazon's retail industry in Mexico. A year later, when Juan became the director of Amazon in Mexico, the family had to relocate to Mexico City. Abril hoped that the change of scenery would resolve their problems, but unfortunately, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos presented himself as a loving husband and father to the public, but behind closed doors, he was abusive and controlling towards his wife, Abril. He would often post on social media about how much he loved her, but in reality, He was constantly accusing her of cheating and even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Despite his successful career, which included becoming the director of e-commerce at a multinational company, his marriage was deteriorating. The tension between him and Abril became unbearable, and after a trip to Monterey to celebrate Christmas with her family, she realized she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer. During the trip, Juan's anger boiled over, and he physically attacked Abril, grabbing her by the neck and strangling her. He had received a photo from the private investigator of Abril with a male colleague, which he mistakenly believed was her lover. In reality, the man was just a coworker. Abril decided not to engage with Juan's accusations and instead filed for divorce on January 4, 2019. They had already separated and planned to inform their children about their impending divorce. However, the situation took a violent turn one early morning. Abril was asleep when she was suddenly struck on the head with a baseball bat by her partner, Juan. Initially disoriented, Abril thought the ceiling had collapsed, but as her vision cleared, she saw Juan standing over her. She attempted to push him away and escape, but he overpowered her, prompting her to scream for help. Their 16-year-old son rushed to his mother's aid, quickly assessing the situation and intervening to prevent Juan from causing further harm. He managed to get Abril away from Juan and escorted her out of the house to seek emergency medical attention for her injury. After her discharge, she immediately filed a police report against her husband. The authorities sided with her, granting her custody of their 2 children and ordering Juan to pay 6,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,350, in monthly alimony. However, this amount was deemed insufficient to cover the costs of raising their 2 minors. After overcoming her initial fear and financial struggles, Abril began a new chapter in her life, driven by her determination to create a better future for her children. She relocated to Monterey with her kids, where she attended Juan Carlos' trial and filed for divorce. Reflecting on her traumatic experience and the abuse she suffered, Abril reevaluated her life. She joined a Christian organization that supported families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her ultimate goal was to establish a support system for women who had endured similar abuse, just as she had. As Abril worked towards rebuilding her life, the court proceedings against Juan Carlos continued. 9 months after the attack, Juan was formally charged with attempted murder. The case was then brought to court, where Judge Federico Mask ordered Juan's informal arrest. Consequently, Juan was incarcerated for several weeks. Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, Judge Hector Jimenez reviewed the case. He found the hospital photographs and Abril's testimony, along with that of her son, insufficient to prove Juan's guilt. The judge also believed that if Juan had intended to kill Abril, he would have done so. Additionally, he considered the baseball bat used in the attack to be a blunt object, rather than a deadly weapon. As a result, the charges were downgraded, and the preliminary arrest was cancelled. With only a few hearings remaining, the outcome of the case was uncertain, causing Abril and her loved one significant anxiety and frustration. In a desperate attempt to have her concerns heard, Abril wrote to the judge, expressing her fears for her life and pleading for him to consider the threat Juan posed. However, her letter was ignored. Juan then began a custody battle for their children. Abril was forced to leave Monterey and travel to Mexico City for the remaining hearings. She also had to subject her children to psychological evaluations, as Juan had claimed in his lawsuit that Abril had manipulated them into rejecting him. A week before a critical court hearing, Abril sat down with her 3 children to express her love and wishes for their future. She encouraged them to chase their dreams and find the strength to forgive their father. This conversation seemed like a farewell, as if Abril sensed that it might be her last opportunity to reassure her children of her love. On November 25, 2019, Abril followed her ex-husband's instructions to avoid potential legal issues that could have led to her separation from her children. She traveled to Mexico City, coincidentally on the same day that thousands of women marched in the streets to commemorate the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence on March 19, 2021. The court reclassified a case involving violence against Abril, which occurred in January 2019, as attempted murder. This decision was made after Abril's relatives and the prosecutor filed several petitions for judicial review, ultimately leading to the cancellation of the original decision. 2 months later, on May 23, the remaining suspects in Abril's murder case were apprehended, including 3 women and 1 man. The investigation resulted in the issuance of 3 search warrants and 8 arrest warrants. During the first search, 48-year-old Amanda Vicente Rodriguez was taken into custody. A series of arrests were made in connection with a recent crime. In the Jardín de Morelos colony, 34-year-old Mabel Montelier Morena and 48-year-old Garcia Alicia Flores Valdez were taken into custody, and their mobile phones were seized. Another arrest was made in the Alvar Aragon colony in Mexico City, where 50-year-old Isa Jalil Castillo, also known as Aguirre or Alvar's godmother, was detained. At the same time, 9 gang members were apprehended, with 7 of them allegedly linked to the Abril case. However, one suspect, Juan Carlos, remained at large, prompting authorities to reissue a warrant for his arrest. General Prosecutor Ernesto Godoy explained that the initial warrant was for attempted murder, while the new one was for the actual killing of a woman. Despite efforts to locate Juan, he remained elusive. In a surprising turn of events, a man named Rolf, also known as El Chalón, contacted the authorities and claimed to have information about the case. During questioning, he revealed that he was the one who had actually pulled the trigger and taken Abril's life. The perpetrator, Rodolfo Daniel Bendis, eventually pleaded guilty to the crime. He claimed that Juan Carlos had promised to pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bendis, Juan Carlos had contacted him while he was in pre-trial detention and provided him with the address of Abril in Mexico City. Juan Carlos allegedly instructed Bendis to spy on Abril and provided written instructions on how to commit the crime. He also promised to provide Bendis with a gun in Monterrey. However, when Bendis arrived in Monterrey, no one contacted him, and he did not receive the gun. He returned to Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until after his release from prison. Upon his release, Juan Carlos contacted Bendis again and informed him that the plan had changed. He now wanted Abril to be killed in Mexico City, as he had managed to lure her there. The case was divided into multiple hearings due to the complexity of the judicial system. The first trial began in August 2022, with Bendis and Juan Carlos as the initial defendants. During this trial, the prosecution presented 28 witness statements and 14 pieces of expert evidence. During the recent trial, a key defendant known as El Shung Galán testified about his role in planning and committing the crime of feminicide, for which he had previously pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court delivered its verdict, finding Rodolfo Danielo Baza and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty and sentencing them to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay approximately 56,000 Mexican pesos, $30,000 US, in damages. Following the trial, the men were taken to a detention center to begin serving their sentences. However, the Abril family immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, as they believed the sentence was too lenient. They pointed out that Rodolfo was the one who fired the fatal shots. As for the remaining defendants, it was previously decided in October 2014 that their trials would be divided. This decision was met with an appeal from prosecutors, who argued that it would significantly delay the proceedings and result in unnecessary additional costs for the court. The tragic case of Abril continues to affect her family and the wider Mexican society, and despite the recent verdict, the trials are not yet over. After the court hearing, Abril got into a car with her children and their lawyer. She asked the lawyer to drive them to the airport for their flight back to Monterrey. En route, they stopped at an intersection where a motorcyclist pulled up beside them. The motorcyclist, who was actually a hired assassin, shot Abril multiple times in the head. Luckily, her children, who were seated in the back, escaped serious harm. One child, who was lying down, was grazed by a bullet but suffered only minor injury. Abril was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 6 hours later. The lawyer immediately contacted Abril's family to inform them of the tragedy. Her brother Javier traveled to Mexico City to handle the aftermath of the incident. The community suspected Juan Carlos of being involved in the crime, but the authorities took a different stance. Since the shooter's identity and motives were unknown, they couldn't classify the case as femicide and make an arrest. Instead, the case was initially treated as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather evidence that could potentially prove it was a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to accuse Juan Carlos, but her account was deleted as a result. Abril's family was fearful that the perpetrator would go unpunished and sought to raise public awareness about the case through social media. The fact that Abril died on a day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence added a deeper significance to her death. The family organized protests and marches to demand justice for Abril. Following Abril's tragic death, social media erupted in outrage as people realized that she had repeatedly expressed her fear of her abuser, only to be ignored by the authorities. Her family and friends held a funeral mass at the Benito Flores Chapel in Monterrey, where dozens gathered to pay their respects and demand justice for Abril. The funeral procession then proceeded to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles, where Abril was laid to rest. Her case has sparked widespread attention to the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in cases where judges release men who have attacked women. Abril's ex-husband, Juan Carlos, was released from prison after appealing his sentence, and was able to track Abril down to Mexico City, where he ultimately took her life. In response to Abril's case, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation into the judges who allowed Juan Carlos to be released from prison. The judges in question, Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez, are being investigated for their roles in Juan Carlos' release. Additionally, representatives of the party of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are calling for Judge Mosa's removal from office, citing his involvement in a previous controversial case in which he released a doctor who had disrespected a patient in a public hospital. The judge initially declined to charge Juan Carlos with femicide, instead only charging him with sexual violence, after which he was released from custody. During the public outcry surrounding the Abril case, Rafael Guerra, the president of the Supreme Court of Mexico City, suspended all judges involved in the case on November 29. Mexico City's head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum, stated that the government would investigate Abril's death. She also warned that the judges involved in the case could be held accountable for Abril's death if it was proven that Juan Carlos was responsible. Local and international media reported that Juan Carlos was released despite evidence against him. Abril's family established a non-profit organization called The Voice of Abril to provide support to victims of violence, including information, psychological assistance, and legal aid. The public demonstrations sparked by Abril's death prompted the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case against Juan Carlos, seeking to prosecute him for attempted murder, which could result in his imprisonment. After being charged, Juan Carlos took to social media to claim that he wanted justice for the crime against Abril and that the perpetrator should be punished. He also stated that he was willing to cooperate with the police, despite having a troubled marriage with Abril, and he would never have wanted her to meet such a tragic end. However, his post sparked widespread discontent among the community. His 18-year-old daughter, Ana Cecilia, publicly spoke out against her father, accusing him of physically and mentally abusing her, her siblings, and Abril over the years. She shared disturbing photos of Abril's injuries after being attacked with a baseball bat. Anna described her father as a narcissistic sociopath who allegedly bribed his way out of prison. During the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos, but it was not directly related to the Abril case. Instead, it was due to him violating judicial duties. Although he was released on the condition that he would check in with the police station weekly, he failed to do so. After missing 2 court hearings, Judge Agustin Monra Gaspar Cannell was left with no choice but to issue the order. Juan wrote a letter claiming he feared for his life and did not want to attend the hearings, stating he and his family had received death threats since Abril's death. He believed someone would seek revenge if he appeared in court. However, the judge rejected this excuse and issued an arrest warrant, also restricting Juan from leaving the country. The investigation continued, aiming to uncover the truth. A letter from Juan was discovered, in which he again denied involvement in Abril's death, claiming he never intended to harm her. He described the night of the incident, stating that Abril had initiated a fight, stabbing him in the side, and he had hit her with a bat in self-defense. The letter sparked outrage among those who heard it, with no one believing Juan's account. The investigation has revealed that Juan Carlos is the primary suspect in the case. Further investigation by the police has identified at least 7 other individuals involved in the crime against Abril. This conclusion was reached after reviewing surveillance footage from the area where the events occurred. The footage shows 2 cars following Abril as she left the courthouse. The drivers of these cars were in contact with the perpetrator who fatally shot Abril. After the attack, the perpetrator and their cars fled the scene. Although the identities of the pursuers were not yet known at the time, the investigation suggested that Juan Carlos may have been involved in the crime. According to investigators, Juan Carlos likely met these individuals while he was in prison and paid one of them to protect him. After his associates were released from prison, Juan Carlos was also released. He then paid them to kill Abril. Notably, Juan Carlos was the only one who knew Abril's route to Mexico City, as he had requested to meet her. After the shocking details of the case became public, no law firm was willing to defend the suspect, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, Abril's loved ones and colleagues cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing any information that could aid in his capture. However, sources from the General Prosecutor's Office soon revealed that Juan Carlos had managed to flee Mexico by crossing the border into the United States. Mexican authorities swiftly alerted Interpol, which launched a global manhunt for Juan Carlos. As a result, he became a wanted man in over 151 countries, with authorities determined to apprehend him at all costs. By the end of January 2024, the case had gone cold, with no new leads or updates. 4 years have passed since Abril's tragic death, yet the true perpetrators remain unpunished. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, holding on to the hope that justice will eventually be served. The question on everyone's mind remains, where is Juan Carlos? His capture is still the top priority for the authorities. Abril's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice until Juan Carlos is found and brought to justice. Tam Xing Fai, a 43-year-old faculty member, was noticeably absent from work, sparking concern among his colleagues. On July 4th, a coworker named Ma tried to reach him on his mobile phone at 11 a.m., but there was no answer. Ma wasn't immediately worried, assuming Tam Xing Fai was busy taking care of his family's adopted dog, which had a skin disease and was scheduled to visit the vet. However, when Xing Fai failed to show up for a meeting at the university's finance department on July 5th, Ma's concern grew. He tried calling Xing Fai's mobile phone again, but there was still no answer. Unfortunately, Ma didn't have Xing Fai's landline phone number, so he couldn't try contacting him that way. By July 6th, Xing Fai had been absent from work for 2 days with no communication with his colleagues. One of his co-workers finally reported the situation to the finance department, which prompted Xing Fai's superiors to call his landline phone. Unfortunately, no one answered that call either. The police contacted the library where Helen Tong Yanyi, the 33-year-old wife of the missing man. Library staff reported that she was also absent from work without prior notice. They, originally from Zhongshan in Guangdong Province, China, had been married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, Hiu Man, 10, and Hiu Ing, 7 years old. Despite their difficult living conditions and financial struggles, the family was known to be kind, happy, and cheerful. They lived in an abandoned recycling station on Huazhu South Road, but Xing Fai often took his daughters on outings to have fun in town. Their children were well behaved, and the family seemed to be a happy one. Given their circumstances, it was possible that the family had decided to take a vacation together. However, something unexpected must have happened, preventing them from returning. Xing Fai's colleagues repeatedly tried to contact him by phone, hoping for a response. Eventually, someone answered, but to their surprise, it was a middle-aged man with an unfamiliar voice, not a member of the family. A man claiming to be Xing Fai's cousin called his workplace, stating that the family had taken a summer vacation to Guangdong Province in mainland China. He allegedly received Xing Fai's phone for safekeeping, but couldn't provide a return date for the family. However, the call only heightened suspicion among Xing Fai's co-workers. They found it out of character for Xing Fai to suddenly leave without notice, as he was a diligent and organized person. If he planned a vacation, he would have arranged it with his children's school in advance. Moreover, the family was responsible for 9 stray dogs, raising concerns about who would care for them. Xing Fai's family situation also raised questions. His father, a sailor, had gone missing, and his mother was living in a nursing home due to illness. Xing Fai regularly visited her every week, making it unlikely that he would abandon her to go on vacation. Eventually, the police were called. One of Xing Fai's colleagues accompanied them to his home, an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. During the trip, a suspicious person was spotted. A short man was seen from a distance near the Xing Fai family's fence before quickly disappearing. Initially, no attention was paid to this, and they continued on. Upon arrival, they found the gate to Xing Fai's home locked. The police investigated the property and interviewed the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covered a large area of approximately 450 square meters, but most of it was empty space, about 350 square meters of flower beds. The construction area was only about 90 square meters, and the building was constructed illegally. The original owner had built several tin houses on the site, using it as a waste recycling facility. A stone house on the opposite side was used as a pig farm, with very few people living in the area. As a result, the police only had one neighbor to question, an elderly woman named Wang who lived alone across the street. Wang claimed to have known the family's schedule and reported that they usually tended to their garden in the afternoon. Su Wang had limited knowledge of the family's personal lives, mainly due to their remote location. She was aware that the family didn't receive many visitors, and the only relative she knew of was Xing Fai's cousin, Su Xingqi. Wang didn't have information about Su Xingqi's address or that of Xing Fai's uncle, who supposedly lived in a nearby stone house. When the police questioned Xing Fai's colleague, they learned that a cousin had answered Xing Fai's phone, leading the police to believe it was Su Xingqi. However, Wang clarified that she didn't know Su Xingqi's address. She did report hearing cries for help from the house on July 5. In response, the police conducted door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village and eventually tracked down a man matching Wang's description at a stone house on Huazhu Road. The man, 42 years old Zhu Shenqi, confirmed that he was Xing Fai's cousin and stated that he occasionally visited the family home to help with renovations and gardening. When questioned about the phone call, Su Xingqi maintained that the family had gone on vacation to China. On July 5, Xing Fai visited his mother at the nursing home and then returned home to inform Su Xingqi that he planned to travel to Danyuan, China for a few days. Due to the high roaming fees, Xing Fai asked Su Xingqi to hold on to his Hong Kong mobile phone until he returned. The person seen fleeing the scene by police and Xing Fai's colleague was actually Su Xingqi, who was leaving after feeding the family dogs. Su Xingqi's behavior and expressions were observed, and he appeared to be telling the truth. His story seemed consistent, and there were no obvious discrepancies. When asked if he had a key to the family home, Su Xingqi denied it. Despite finding Su Xingqi, the police continued their investigation. Going door to door in the village. A local resident reported a stranger borrowed money from a villager, leading to a heated argument. The villager threatened to seek compensation from Xing Fai's family, who were struggling financially due to his mother's hospitalization and existing debts. The villagers initially believed the stranger was not Su Xingqi, but they suspected the family might be hiding to escape their debts. However, when the police inquired about Su Xingqi, the villagers revealed that he had been dishonest. They confirmed that Su Xingqi regularly visited the Xing Fai's home to perform maintenance and repairs, and he was always able to enter the house on his own, even when no one else was present. This information led the police to conclude that Su Xingqi must have had a key or access to the home Xing Fai's. In fact, he did have a key, which Xing Fai had given to him, as witnessed by Wang. When the police asked Su Xingqi for the key, he initially denied owning one, claiming he used a spare key for renovations that he had returned. However, his demeanor had changed, and he was avoiding key details. When the police threatened to search his home, Su Xingqi became agitated and suddenly remembered another house key that he had not returned. He retrieved the key from his dresser and handed it over to the police. Although Su Xingqi's behavior was suspicious, there was no direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance. As a result, the police placed him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. During their investigation, police used a spare key to enter the home, where they found a scene of disarray and evidence of a ransacking. Fresh blood stains on the walls suggested that a violent incident had occurred on the property. The presence of a sink full of dirty dishes in the kitchen raised suspicions about the family's claim to have traveled to China, as it seemed unlikely they would have left their home in such a state before departing. A search of the master bedroom turned up the family's identification cards in a dresser, which prompted the lead investigator to contact the border crossing office. The office reported that the family had not left Hong Kong. Further investigation of the house uncovered a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic water pipe in the corner. Police then deployed sniffer dogs to search for additional evidence and potentially locate the missing family members. The dogs detected a scent and discovered blood stains under recently disturbed soil 9 meters away. Furthermore, despite it being summer vacation, their children, Hiu Man and Hiu Ain, were enrolled in summer school, indicating that the family would not have been on vacation. It became clear that the family had been victims of a crime, so a special team was set up to investigate. Due to the late hour, the police cordoned off the scene, restricted access to Pingqi village. Su Xingqi was confined to home. He was the prime suspect in the case. Su Xingqi promptly confessed. According to Su Xingqi's statement, he was from Huanpu in Guangdong province and typically resided with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and 16, who suffered from memory issues. Su Xingqi previously earned a living selling motorcycles in Junction City. However, following Guangdong's ban on motorcycles in 2006, sales plummeted. Financial struggles led him to reach out to his cousin, Xing Fai, in Hong Kong, seeking employment opportunities. Xing Fai helped Su Xingqi secure a construction job that provided a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars, including accommodation and meals. After working for half a month, Su Xingqi became dissatisfied with his salary, which was reduced to 220 Hong Kong dollars due to company deductions. He impulsively quit his job and returned to China. However, in 2007, a typhoon damaged his home, and he needed money for repairs. Su Xingqi asked Xing Fai to help him find work in Hong Kong again. When Xing Fai couldn't find him a job, he proposed an alternative arrangement. Xing Fai would pay Su Xingqi from his own salary to help with household chores and repairs at his home. Su Xingqi accepted this offer and began traveling to Hong Kong every other month to work on Xing Fai's home and garden. Su Xingqi claims that he and Tong Yanyi, Xing Fai's wife, began a clandestine romantic relationship. However, Xing Fai discovered their relationship on July 3rd. On July 5th, Su Xingqi accompanied Xing Fai to a nursing home to visit his mother. Su Xingqi snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Yanyi. Unexpectedly, Xing Fai returned home early and, in a fit of rage, physically confronted Su Xingqi. In a state of panic, the man grabbed a 25-centimeter-long fruit knife and stabbed Xing Fai until he fell to the ground, dead. Overwhelmed by what had just happened, he wanted to turn himself in to the police. However, Su Xingqi refused to let that happen. Since he couldn't change his mind, Su Xingqi decided to kill Xing Fai. Su Xingqi found some wires in the corner of the room, charged at him, knocked him to the ground, and tied his hands behind his back. Su Xingqi then covered Xing Fai's mouth and nose with tape and put a plastic bag over his head. Before this, their two children were in their bedroom watching cartoons. They heard the commotion and their parents warning to run away, but instead, they ran towards their parents and saw their father dead and Su Xingqi in the process of killing their mother. The children ran back to their room, crying, and locked the door. Since the parent was already tied up, Su Xingqi left to pursue the children. Su Xingqi picked up a pair of pliers, opened the door, and used more wires to restrain the children. He tied their hands behind their backs, covered their mouths and noses with tape, and put plastic bags over their heads. The children, Hiu Ing and Hiu Man, also suffocated shortly after. After killing the whole family, Su Xingqi was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many blood stains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold the family of 4 and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before filling it back in. The police believed Su Xingqi's story, despite being skeptical about his motive, and took him to the location where he claimed the crime had taken place. He pointed out the spot where the sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, and other tools used in the crime were hidden. On July 7th, the police called in the fire department to assist in unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. However, they quickly encountered a problem when they hit a layer of cement while digging. It turned out that Su Xingqi had failed to mention in his confession that he had filled the pit with cement before covering it up. The firefighters were unable to break through the cement with their tools, and the police had to call in a private engineering company for assistance. The engineers arrived with high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. However, when they reached a point where they saw human hair, they became uneasy and refused to continue digging, not wanting to encounter a dead body. It took the police 13 hours to persuade them to resume the excavation. After excavating the pit, authorities found it to be 2.5 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The bodies of the 4 family members were discovered at the bottom, all barefoot and wearing only t-shirts and shorts. Xing Fai's body was at the very bottom. His hands and feet were bound with electric wire, and he had multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back, and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. The other family members were similarly bound with electric wire. Yanyi's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. 2 family members, Hiu Man and Hiu Ing, showed no obvious signs of trauma, leading police to suspect they may have been buried alive. Su Xingqi was formally arrested and interrogated. During the interrogation, he altered his confession. He admitted that he lied about the affair. Shan Hui kicked Su Xingqi out of the house and banned him from returning. Despite this, Su Xingqi came back to apologize and was surprisingly forgiven by Xing Fai. Su Xingqi returned to the house on July 3 to start working, and it seemed that his relationship with Xing Fai had been repaired. However, on July 4, Su Xingqi attempted to molest a family member. Su Xingqi fled the house in a rage, not wanting to alert the neighbors. The next day, Su Xingqi tried to force his way into the house again, claiming he wanted to apologize. However, Xing Fai had anticipated this and returned home early. They got into an argument, which escalated into Su Xingqi stabbing Xing Fai. Su Xingqi's later confession matched his initial one, but with the additional detail of filling a makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was discovered that Su Xingqi's account of the events was inaccurate. The autopsy revealed that Xing Fai's murder was more brutal than initially described. Xing Fai had sustained 9 stab wounds to the head and neck, nearly 80 stab wounds to the body, and 10 stab wounds to the hands and feet. Contrary to Su Xingqi's claim, Xing Fai was strangled, not suffocated with a plastic bag. Hiu Ying's cause of death was the only accurate part of Su Xingqi's account. Forensic analysis of the home found at the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Su Xingqi's DNA. This suggested that Xing Fai was not killed in the kitchen, but rather elsewhere in the house. The investigation also revealed that the murder was premeditated, as the cement used to bury the bodies had been purchased by Su Xingqi prior to the murder. Furthermore, the weapon used was not a kitchen knife from the family, but rather one belonging to Su Xingqi. Additional investigations by the police found that the family's bank cards had been used at an ATM after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. The cash and bank cards belonging to the family were also missing. Su Xingqi's motive for the crime was robbery, and it was premeditated. Whenever the police pointed out inconsistencies in his story, he would suddenly come up with a new explanation. According to Su Xingqi, his family's ancestral home in China needed urgent repairs, and his 2 children required 100,000 in cash to cover their school fees. He was not well liked in his local community, so he knew it would be difficult to borrow money from his neighbors. He turned to Xing Fai for help because his business trips to Hong Kong had not generated enough income. Su Xingqi suspected that Su Xingqi was wealthier than he seemed and that he is very stingy. The reason for his low salary during his time working for Xing Fai was that they were exploiting him for low-cost labor. On July 3, Su Xingqi traveled to Hong Kong without informing anyone and waited until July 5, when they had a day off from work. When Xing Fai returned home and found Su Xingqi there, he asked if he needed to cook something, and they men went to the kitchen together. Su Xingqi asked to borrow 1 million Hong Kong dollars, but Xing Fai rejected the request. He explained that he had to use the money for his mother's medical treatment and his daughter's education. However, Su Xingqi didn't believe him and accused Xing Fai of only using him for cost labor. Xing Fai became angry and ordered Su Xingqi to leave. As Xing Fai turned his back, with a concealed knife on Shengqi attacked him from behind, covering his mouth and stabbing him. Su Xingqi then restrained in Hiu Ying and Hiu Man and began searching the house for cash and bank cards. He demanded to know the password for the bank cards, and Xing Fai intentionally gave him a fake password. Su Xingqi didn't realize this at the time. Su Xingqi claimed that he had killed others by covering their mouths and noses with tape and putting a plastic bag over their head. However, when he went to the nearest ATM to withdraw cash, he discovered that the PIN number he had been given didn't work, and realized that Xing Fai had lied to him. Upon returning home, Su Xingqi discovered that everyone had suffocated to death in his absence. He found the food he and the others had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses while contemplating how to dispose of the bodies. After stealing $6,000 in Hong Kong dollars from Xing Fai's body, Su Xingqi buried the corpses and tools in a small pit, then went to sleep at Xing Fai home. The next morning, Su Xingqi realized that the smell from the bodies might lead to their discovery, so he bought cement and returned to the home. He dug up the pit, poured in the cement, and refilled the hole. Su Xingqi then stayed at the home to answer any calls to Xing Fai's cell phone or house phone, telling callers that he was taking care of things while the Xing Fai family is on vacation. However, Su Xingqi did not expect his ruse to be uncovered so quickly. Even later, he continued to lie about many details, including when he bought the cement and the cause of Yan Yi's death. At this stage, the police didn't think they needed to continue obtaining an accurate confession. In their opinion, they had collected enough evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Su Xingqi initially pleaded not guilty and altered his previous statement. He claimed that his original story about the affair was true, and that Xing Fai was killed in self-defense, while Hiu Man and Hiu Ying were killed accidentally. The defendant stated that he had falsely confessed to extortion and murder brutality, which included physical abuse and suffocation. On November 23, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict for the murders of Xing Fai and Yan Yi. However, the defendant was acquitted of murdering Hiu Ying. Despite this, the defendant received a life sentence for the 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge criticized the defendant, describing him as lacking a conscience and being unrepentant. The judge also accused the defendant of fabricating the self-defense story and affair to tarnish the victims' reputations. After Xing Fai's family death, who lived in Hong Kong, surprisingly defended him. They accused Xing Fai of being a hypocrite and the real villain. According to them, Xing Fai was exploiting Su Xingqi for cheap labor and taking his money. However, the neighbors and residents of Ping Chi village were outraged by these claims, forcing Su Xingqi's family to move back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was considered one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history. The community showed an outpouring of support for the family Xing Fai's, with many visiting their home to offer condolences. Netizens also raised more than enough money to cover the funeral expenses. Additionally, the family's 9 stray dogs were adopted by another family. Every year on July 5, the adoptive family would take the dogs for a walk in Ping Chi village, near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, 55-year-old Su Xingqi passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to liver cancer. The case of Ana Rosa Barrera. Ana Rosa Barrera, a 40-year-old woman. She lived in a commune in the Santa Maria department, near Córdoba City, in the province of Córdoba, Argentina. People close to her described Ana Rosa as a courageous and adventurous person who was not afraid to start over and move forward with determination. Reports indicate that Ana Rosa lived in a tent for 4 years, although the reasons for this are unclear. She worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Córdoba, a job she truly enjoyed. Additionally, she and her partner, Marcelo Favio Ferretto, ran an upholstery workshop together. They met when Ana Rosa started working for Marcelo's business. By 2017, Ana Rosa and Marcelo had been in a 10-year relationship. They shared a common interest in Reiki, a practice that involves using the palms to promote physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Despite this common point, they still have problems in the relationship. Ana Rosa and Marcelo each have 4 children from previous relationships. As for Ana Rosa's family, her parents, brothers, and sisters reside in Córdoba. About Marcelo, he was a wallpaper maker with a workshop near their home. People close to they described Marcelo as a jealous and controlling person, which annoyed Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28, they visited relatives in Villa Lend, but the trip was marred by a heated argument sparked by Marcelo checking Ana Rosa's phone. The argument continued at their home, with neighbors hearing them shout and insult each other until the early hours of Monday morning. Later that day, Marcelo reported Ana Rosa missing to the police, although the exact timing of the report is disputed in media accounts. Most reports agree that Marcelo filed the report at the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. According to Marcelo, claimed to have woken up at 6 a.m. on Monday to find Ana Rosa already gone, which he thought was unusual since she typically got up early to feed their dogs before leaving the house. He repeated this account to both the police and the media. Marcelo said he last saw Ana Rosa on Sunday night and then Monday night before going to bed. According to some sources, Marcelo realized something was wrong when Ana Rosa's colleagues called him, wondering about her absence. They knew she would never miss work without a good reason. Marcelo recounted the events leading up to her disappearance, saying that on Monday, he came across Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet while running an errand at the local pharmacy. Not long after, police discovered an abandoned car on Rainier Avenue outside a beauty salon in the Santa Isabel neighborhood. The location is about halfway between their home and Ana Rosa's workplace. Inside the car were her belongings and keys, but her cell phone was nowhere to be found. According to Marcelo, he tried to contact her, their friends, and their children also left messages, but no one received a response. The last message Ana Rosa sent via WhatsApp was at 10:40 p.m. Sunday, May 28. Ana Rosa's relatives all said that the circumstances surrounding Ana Rosa's disappearance are unclear. Marcelo has maintained regular contact with police since filing the report and has also attempted to locate Ana Rosa through social media and news outlets. In an interview with reporters, Marcelo shared Ana Rosa's plans on the day she went missing, which included an early morning swim at a gym and a scheduled appointment with a doctor. Marcelo emphasized that his primary concern is Ana Rosa's safe return home. Prosecutor Legendro Peralta Tanilo of Alta Gracia assumed control of the case, and the investigation commenced. Multiple theories were initially proposed, including the possibility of Ana Rosa being a victim of kidnapping, robbery, or revenge. The option of her leaving voluntarily was also considered. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for over 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. However, his statements became increasingly inconsistent, raising suspicions among investigators. Marcelo's claims raised suspicions among detectives due to inconsistencies and shifting demeanor. Initially, he was confident and gave frequent interviews, but later emphasized his innocence, providing unsolicited details and justifying himself by discussing his relationship with Ana Rosa. As time passed, Ana Rosa's loved ones became increasingly desperate due to the lack of progress in the search. Meanwhile, the investigative authorities persisted in their efforts to solve the case. The prosecutor leading the investigation was convinced that Marcelo was withholding information and urged the investigators to scrutinize him more thoroughly. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo's demeanor shifted. He became more composed. However, when detectives showed him data from cell phone towers that contradicted his alibi, Marcelo became dismayed and ultimately revealed the truth. He admitted to killing Ana Rosa, running her over, and then dismembering her body to get rid of the evidence. After confessing to the brutal crime, Marcelo revealed the location of the dismembered body of Ana Rosa. Following the Marcelo confession, the police, aided by a canine unit, found Ana Rosa's remains at approximately 2:30 p.m. in a hole dug by Marcelo on a dirt road in the countryside, near a factory. The location was familiar to Marcelo, as he frequently visited the area for work-related purposes. It became clear that Marcelo's previous statements were false, except for his mention of a quarrel that occurred early Monday morning. According to the reconstructed events, Marcelo and Ana Rosa had been arguing the entire weekend before she went missing. Marcelo's intense jealousy sparked the violence. In the heat of an argument, Marcelo used a sledgehammer to hit Ana Rosa multiple times until she died. He then tried to put her body in the car but failed. Instead, he used a knife to dismember her body. He placed Ana Rosa's remains in the car and began moving to her burial site. After pleading guilty, authorities conducted a search of the defendant and Ana Rosa's home on Friday, where they discovered various tools, including machetes and knives of various sizes. Marcelo was then arrested and facing charges of capital murder, a crime that could carry a sentence of life in prison. Prosecutor Peralta Atima explained that the defendant's statement, in which he took responsibility for the crime, was not considered a formal confession. Instead, the record shows that he admitted to the crime during an interview as a witness. A formal statement will be made in the coming days, once sufficient evidence is gathered to support the charges. This evidence will include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items found during searches, and the results of luminal tests. Marcelo's lawyer, Jose Luis Saca, stated that the police statement had no legal weight and could not as evidence. Furthermore, the defense announced that the defendant would not testify. Over the weekend, investigations continued, and on June 5th, the preliminary autopsy report was released. The report concluded that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. On June 9th, it was discovered that luminol tests had been conducted at the home where Ana Rosa and Marcelo lived. The tests showed a large amount of blood had been cleaned up. The medical examiners also discovered new details during the autopsy, including knife cuts on the victim's extremities. A cut, 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, reaching the cervical region. Based on these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo with double aggravated murder. Almost 2 years after Ana Rosa's murder, Marcelo's trial began. The prosecution explained the seriousness of the charges to the jury. According to the autopsy results, Ana Rosa suffered a severe initial blow to the face, which left her unconscious, followed by multiple blows to the head that crushed her skull. At the first hearing, Marcelo decided to stay silent. The court then heard testimony from witnesses. Deborah Territorios, Ana Rosa's daughter, testified that after her mother met Marcelo, she became increasingly distant from her children and other family members. Deborah stated that she and her father moved to a different city, followed by her older siblings, which made it harder for them to communicate with their mother. However, when Deborah spent time alone with her mother, Ana Rosa was loving and caring. But whenever Marcelo was around, her mother would pull away. Deborah even had to leave her mother's house quickly on occasion because Marcelo was expected to arrive soon. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, also testified. He witnessed their argument on May 28, 2017, which started at his house. According to Roberto, The argument began when Marcelo saw a message on Ana Rosa's phone. The prosecutor's indictment highlights Marcelo's control over Ana Rosa, including a power imbalance in their relationship and objectifying her in front of others. Fernando, a co-worker and friend of the victim, Ana Rosa, explained that after she started dating Marcelo, she initially grew distant from everyone, but then she tried to reconnect. System. Fernando added that Marcelo seemed to imitate Ana Rosa's actions, even taking Reiki classes shortly after learning she was also taking. According to the indictment, Ana Rosa told a friend that after starting energy harmonization therapy, she felt better and was able to improve her relationships with family members. She also planned to visit her son in Bolivia. However, as Ana Rosa's life improved, Marcelo became increasingly aggressive. Fernando reported that Marcelo once lashed out when Ana Rosa said women with positive attitudes could achieve their goals, he calling women idiots who would end up dying in a ditch. On the second day of the hearing, Claudio Bustamante, the police officer who took Marcelo's statement, testified. He told the jury that Marcelo had spontaneously confessed during the interrogation without any pressure from him. According to Bustamante, Marcelo stated that Ana Rosa had told him on Monday that she was no longer satisfied with him and was cheating on him, which made Marcelo angry and prompted him to hit her, although he couldn't remember what he used to hit her. On April 11th, the 11th Criminal Court's jury delivered its verdict, finding Marcelo Favio fair guilty of the murder of Ana Rosa Barrera. The sentence was life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years, conditional on good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, Ana Rosa's relatives burst into tears and shouted at Marcelo, labeling him as a murderer and wishing him to spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecutor in charge of the case stated that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. The evidence showed that Marcelo Favio Fair had acted with full awareness and premeditation in planning Ana Rosa's murder. According to the prosecution, Marcelo's attempt to appear mentally unstable at the time of the crime was a tactic to evade the maximum sentence. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, to Julie Hosteler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new Human Resources Director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29th, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening, which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarr concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. The case of Celia Barquin. On Monday, September 17, 2018, in Ames, Iowa, the weather was warm and clear. Celia Barquin Arozamena, a 22-year-old university student, decided to play golf at Coldwater Golf Links Club before her classes. During her drive to the course, she spoke with her mother, who expressed concern for her safety. Despite her confidence, Celia's day took a devastating turn. Although the golf course was crowded, she became the victim of a horrific crime. Born on July 6, 1996, in Point San Miguel, a small village in northern Spain, Celia had moved to Iowa on a golf scholarship, leaving behind a family that had lived in the village for 8 generations. Celia, a talented athlete, had numerous university options offering her a tuition-free education. However, she chose to attend a university in Ames, Iowa, a quiet and cozy town with a population of 65,000, which reminded her of her hometown in Spain. At the time, she had no idea that this decision would have severe consequences and that Ames would become her final refuge. Celia was very close to her family, who remained in her home country. Her parents, Maria Rosa and Marcos Barkin, had 2 children, Celia and her sibling Andres. Her father worked as a butcher, while her mother initially worked in a clothing store as a salesperson. After the children were born, she became a full-time homemaker, dedicating herself to raising the children and managing the household. The family lived a modest life, but they were a close-knit and supportive one. Their children's well-being and education were their top priority. Andres pursued a career in law, while Celia, who had a natural talent for golf, earned a scholarship to study in the United States. Celia had a clear goal in mind: to buy a house for her family and take care of them. To achieve this, she worked hard and practiced diligently to excel in her sport. Her efforts paid off, earning her numerous titles and awards in various competitions. Notably, she won the European Women's Amateur Championship in Slovenia in June 2018, came in second in the European Women's Team Golf Competition, and was crowned the 2018 Confederation Big 12 Women's Golf Champion in the United States. She was also named the 2018 Iowa State Athlete of the Year. With her impressive achievements, Celia's future looked bright, and many had high expectations for her. Despite moving to the United States, Celia remained close to her family. She made it a point to call her parents every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Whenever she had free time, she would feel homesick and miss her family dearly. During her vacations, Celia would visit her family in Spain. Even on her home country breaks, she continued to work tirelessly to refine her skills. Her mother was a strong supporter of her daughter's passion and often joined her in training sessions. Celia had a comfortable life in Iowa, where she lived with her boyfriend, Carlos Nigri Nablas, in a rented apartment. Their relationship had an interesting backstory. They met in university, where Celia was already in a relationship with someone else. Despite this, Carlos was immediately smitten with her. Her captivating smile, kind nature, and determined personality drew him in, and he came to greatly respect her perseverance. Although she wasn't available at the time, Carlos became her closest friend and confidant, always offering support and encouragement. For over a year, Carlos supported his friend Celia through her tumultuous relationship with her boyfriend. When she finally broke up with him, Carlos confessed his long-held feelings to her. After a walk together, Celia revealed her own feelings by pulling Carlos close and kissing him. Overjoyed by her reciprocation, Carlos ran through the dormitory, screaming with happiness. This marked the beginning of their romance. To celebrate, Carlos set off fireworks and sent Celia a heartfelt video, expressing his admiration for her. As their relationship blossomed, they became inseparable. Eventually, they decided to take the next step and move in together. Carlos and Celia were busy preparing for their future together, having already gotten engaged. In May 2017, Carlos graduated from college and landed a job at an engineering firm in Ames. Meanwhile, Celia was nearing the end of her senior year at Iowa State University, where she was also studying civil engineering. After retiring from athletics, Celia had her sights set on a career in engineering, driven by a desire to make a positive impact and prove that women could thrive in a traditionally male-dominated field. Celia spent the summer of 2018 in Spain with her family before returning to Iowa to graduate. As a member of the Iowa State women's golf team, she was a promising athlete who also competed individually. She was preparing for an upcoming competition, but her plans were about to take a devastating turn. On September 17, 2018, Celia arrived at the golf club after speaking with her mother. The staff, familiar with the talented athlete, informed her that a group of 15 older men from Des Moines would be playing golf at 8:45. The group was assigned to the starting line near the first 4 holes. As they arrived in golf carts and began to play, Celia took notice of them. A group of retirees invited Celia to begin her round, so she proceeded with her cart, opting to play the first hole followed by the fourth to avoid delaying the older men. They found her to be courteous and friendly. Next, Celia headed to the seventh hole, a location not favored by many due to its remote position relative to the other holes and its proximity to Squaw Creek Park, which featured dense foliage. Athletes were often hesitant to play at the seventh hole because it occasionally attracted unauthorized visitors, including homeless individuals who could be aggressive. However, Celia was new to the club and unaware of the situation, so she played the seventh hole to make her way to the ninth. The route involved crossing a bridge on a broad path before navigating a wooded section, a place one coach described as eerily similar to the atmosphere of Sleepy Hollow. At 10:30 a.m., a group of 15 people made their way to the area where Celia's belongings were left. To their surprise, her cart was still there, but Celia was nowhere to be found. The group decided to investigate further as they found it unusual that she didn't reappear after 10 minutes. As they approached her cart, they discovered some of Celia's belongings scattered on the field, including her t-shirt and baseball cap, while her phone remained on the cart. It appeared that some items had fallen out of her pocket, but it was unclear why her t-shirt was on the ground and why she had left her phone behind. After searching the surrounding area, the group couldn't find any sign of Celia. They immediately alerted the club management to report their disturbing findings. A group of people reported that a young, blonde girl had been playing golf at the course earlier, but she was now nowhere to be found, and her belongings were still on the ground. Upon investigation, staff realized that she was Celia, the reigning European golf champion. A search was launched, and less than 30 minutes later, a body was spotted floating in a pond near the ninth hole. This discovery prompted the staff to call the police immediately. Upon recovering the body from the water, police officers identified the victim as Celia Barkin. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered multiple stab wounds to her neck and torso. A search dog was brought in and quickly picked up a scent, leading the police to a tent in a wooded area of Squaw Creek Park. Although the tent was empty, it contained bloodstains, suggesting that the perpetrator may have been hiding there. Police suspected that a homeless person, possibly living in the tent, might have been responsible for the attack. The police were searching for the perpetrator and found a man near the tent. The man claimed to live in the area and just wanted to retrieve his tent. As it turned out, the man was Colin Richards, 22 years old, the same age as Celia. Despite their similar ages, they couldn't be more different. However, it became clear that Colin was responsible for the murder. Physical evidence incriminated him. His face was badly scratched, and his black backpack contained bloody clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts. The clothes indicated that he had recently changed out of his blood-soaked garments and into clean ones. The police dogs also picked up his scent. Additionally, Colin had a severe gash on his left arm that was bleeding. Although he tried to hide the injury and conceal his arm from the officers, his efforts only added to their suspicions. Colin Richards was arrested by police in connection with the crime. According to his account, he was at a friend's house before the police arrived. Two male friends had driven him to the park to collect his tent, and it was there that he encountered the police. Collins denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he had never met the victim, Celia. He explained the scratches on his face by saying he had scratched himself on branches while walking through a wooded area. Colin had a history with the police, having struggled with substance abuse, alcoholism, and mental health issues. He had become homeless after being released from prison 3 months prior to the murder, having served a 7-month sentence for burglary. Colin had a history of run-ins with the law, having been convicted multiple times for similar offenses. His troubled past began in his teenage years, and he grew up in a dysfunctional family. Detectives interviewed 3 acquaintances of Colin's, including a homeless man with whom he shared a tent. 2 other men gave Colin a ride from his home to the park. The homeowner allowed Colin to clean up and change his clothes, as he was disheveled and covered in mud, blood, sand, and water. After washing up and changing, Colin left with his bloody clothes in a backpack, intending to return to the park to retrieve his tent before leaving the area. The men described Colin's behavior that day as unusual, extremely nervous, and hurried. He didn't explain why he was in such a rush, only mentioning that he had cut himself and soiled his clothes. One of the homeless men who lived with Colin in the park revealed that Colin always carried a serrated knife, which he used for personal protection. The day before the murder, Colin had confided in this friend about having a desire to rape and kill someone, but the friend didn't take him seriously. Colin was immediately charged with first-degree murder after her body was discovered. The investigators believed that the crime was premeditated, meaning Colin had planned it ahead of time and was actively looking for a victim on the day of the murder. The judge set Colin's bail at $5 million, but since he couldn't afford it, he remained in custody until his trial. Meanwhile, Celia's family in Spain was growing increasingly worried because they hadn't heard from her. Despite numerous attempts by the police and aims to reach them, it was too late at night in Spain and no one was available to receive the devastating news. Eventually, the coach was forced to make the heartbreaking call to Celia's parents, informing them that their daughter had been brutally murdered. A serrated knife was discovered in a wooded area, bearing the fingerprints and DNA of Colin, as well as the blood of the deceased. Additionally, skin particles from Colin were found under the victim's fingernails, indicating that the scratches on his body were inflicted by the victim during a struggle, not by branches. Initially, Colin denied any involvement in the crime, but later, faced with overwhelming evidence, he confessed to the attack. He claimed that he had been under the influence of substances on the day of the incident and was not thinking clearly. Colin stated that he had been walking in the woods when he came across a young girl, Celia, who was alone in the area. He targeted her, having never seen or known her before, and subjected her to a violent attack. The death penalty was abolished in Iowa in 1965, so the maximum sentence Colin faced was life imprisonment without parole. During the trial, Colin's family shared details about his life. His parents were not married and did not live together when he was born. For the first 10 years of his life, Colin lived with his father, who raised him in a strict and often neglectful manner. His father would frequently leave him alone at night to go to the bar, and it was actually his grandparents who provided Colin with care and support. When Colin was 10, his mother, who had since married another man and had 2 more children, gained custody of him. The family moved to the countryside, seeking a more peaceful environment. However, their household was still marked by strict discipline. Colin's room was extremely tidy, leading his family to jokingly suggest that he would be well suited for a career in the military. Colin started out as a diligent student, but as he entered his teenage years, he began to follow in the footsteps of his father, a heavy drinker. Despite his father's attempts to set him straight, Colin's behavior worsened, leading to his expulsion from the family home at the age of 15. Without a stable support system, Colin fell in with a bad crowd, dropped out of school, and became addicted to substances. At 18, Colin was involved with a girlfriend significantly older than him. However, their relationship turned violent, and he was arrested for domestic abuse in May 2015. He was found guilty and served a 60-day jail sentence. On another occasion, Colin was accused of shoplifting and responded by threatening to return and carry out a violent act. Despite his downward spiral, those around him seemed to ignore his problems. Over the next 2 years following the domestic violence incident, Colin had multiple run-ins with the law, being arrested for various offenses such as theft, harassment, and attempted burglary. In an attempt to address his behavioral issues, he was ordered to take intervention courses, but these efforts were unsuccessful. In November 2017, Colin began serving a 2-year sentence at Mount Pleasant Correctional Facility for burglary in violating his probation. However, due to the facility being over capacity, he was paroled in June 2018 after only serving 7 months of his sentence, despite exhibiting disciplinary problems, including engaging in fights with other inmates. Sadly, Colin went on to commit a heinous crime just 3 months later, killing Celia. After his release from prison, Colin reunited with his mother and stepfather, with whom he resided, and resumed a relationship that had been rekindled through correspondence during his incarceration. Colin's parents gave him a chance to start anew, trusting that he would stay away from illicit substances and old friends with a bad influence. However, he broke this promise just 2 weeks later and was subsequently kicked out of his home. With nowhere to go, Colin traveled to Ames, a city an hour away, where he initially sought refuge in the local homeless shelter. Unfortunately, the shelter was full, and he had to find alternative accommodations. Colin's mother helped him out by purchasing a tent, which became his temporary home. However, his presence in Ames soon caught the attention of the local police department. On June 29th, Colin was arrested for public intoxication. Later, on August 11th, police received a complaint from a Target store about Colin and another homeless man camping in the store's parking lot. After being chased away, they men relocated to Squaw Creek Park, where they could camp without disturbing others. There is a discrepancy between Colin's account and the police's statement regarding his camping in the park. Colin claims that the police allowed him to camp there, but the police representatives deny this and assert that overnight camping in the park is prohibited. They also claim that Colin was not given permission to camp and that he was breaking the law if he did so. On September 8th, Colin's mother and stepfather visited him in Ames to celebrate his 22nd birthday. During their time together, they took him out to dinner and did his laundry. However, his mother became concerned about his behavior, as he was distant and gave brief, muted responses to their questions. After dropping him off at the tent in the park where he was living with another man, Colin's parents returned home. Unbeknownst to them, Colin would soon confess to a friend that he had been thinking about raping and killing a woman. Tragically, the next morning, Celia was found dead, although it was later determined that she had not been raped. The police suggested that Colin likely did not have sufficient time to commit both crimes. Following his arrest and trial, Colin's parents expressed their regret that they could not have done more to stop him. As a result, Colin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on August 23, 2019. He is currently serving his sentence at the Story County Jail in Nevada, Iowa. The town of Ames was deeply saddened by Celia's tragic death, with thousands attending a candlelight vigil to pay tribute to the gifted athlete. Her family was devastated by the news of her murder, feeling a sense of injustice that her life had been taken by someone who had achieved nothing and had no aspirations, whereas Celia had shown great promise and had a bright future ahead of her. Celia's parents have preserved her room as a memorial, with the addition of an engineering degree that was awarded to her posthumously by the state of Iowa. They often visit the local golf club, where Celia learned to play golf, and reminisce about happy times. The circumstances surrounding the safety measures implemented by the golf club for holes 7 and 17 following the incident are unclear. Carlos, Celia's boyfriend, found it unbearable to remain in the city where constant reminders of her presence made his grief unbearable. He relocated to Florida, and his life after that remains a mystery. Celia's brother was deeply affected by her death, losing a significant amount of weight due to stress. However, he found solace in a career driven by his sister's encouragement to help others. He pursued a law degree and subsequently joined the police force. The case of Ashley Wadsworth. Ashley Wadsworth was born on July 25, 2002, in Vernon Township, British Columbia, Canada. She was the daughter of Kenneth Wadsworth and Christy Jenden, and had an older sister named Haley. The Wadsworth family was large and close-knit, consisting of over 50 people, including cousins, uncles, and aunts of varying degrees of kinship, all living in the same community. Ashley was a cheerful, outgoing, and energetic girl who was popular and had many friends. She enjoyed outdoor activities such as swimming, horseback riding, and skiing. She was also passionate about tennis and played the clarinet. Ashley was very active on social media, frequently sharing memes, jokes, and photos. It was through social media that Ashley met Jack Seppel in 2015, when she was 12 years old and he was 15. Jack Seppel was born on January 9, 1999. His mother, Tracy Dalton, was married to a man named Ricky. Jack's relationship with his father, who passed away in 2019, was reportedly strained. Jack did not communicate with his brother, Jordan, but he did stay in touch with his sister, Nadia. Apart from his mother and sister, Jack did not have many close relationships, preferring to interact with people primarily through the internet and video games. According to Jack's acquaintances, he had a mixed reputation in school. On the one hand, he was remembered as a charming, fun, and lively kid. On the other hand, they recalled his dark side, which emerged when he became angry and displayed aggressive behavior towards himself and others. A mutual friend introduced Jack to Ashley through social media, a common way for teenagers to meet and form virtual friendships. As their online relationship grew, Ashley and Jack became close virtual friends. At the time, Ashley didn't have a smartphone and used her family's computer to access social media, so her family was aware of her friendship with Jack. During their long-distance friendship, Jack had relationships with other girls, and Ashley also had typical teenage experiences. Although they occasionally stopped communicating, their connection never completely faded, and they continued to stay in touch over the years. As they grew older, Ashley and Jack's relationship evolved. They started communicating through video calls, which led to a more intimate and romantic relationship. Jack became a familiar figure to Ashley's family, who would often greet him warmly when they saw him talking to the guys. He also sent Ashley gifts, such as teddy bears and purses, on multiple occasions. Ashley's family and friends noticed that she had a tendency to compare every boy she met to Jack. However, due to the significant time difference between their locations, Jack lived in Essex, while Ashley was in Vernon. They struggled to find time to talk, often waking up too early and going to bed too late. As Ashley turned 15 in 2018, she began to express a desire to meet Jack in person. However, her family refused to let her travel alone to another continent. Like many young couples, they occasionally argued, and when Ashley would block Jack on social media during these fights, he would find ways to contact her again, creating new accounts or sending messages through his sister or acquaintances. This behavior was seen as disturbing and intrusive by Ashley's loved ones, but she continued to insist that Jack was a kind and compassionate person. In October 2018, Jack, who was 19 at the time, got a tattoo of Ashley's name on his arm when she was just 16. Her parents thought this display of affection was excessive and warned her to be cautious. However, Jack soon began exhibiting jealous and violent behavior. He would become angry if he suspected Ashley was talking to other guys, despite continuing to date other girls himself. He claimed Ashley was his favorite and swore his loyalty to her alone. This incident marked the beginning of a disturbing pattern of behavior. Ashley's friends and family grew increasingly concerned as Jack's behavior escalated. One day, Ashley called a friend who was at Jack's house, and he wouldn't let her leave. According to the friend who overheard the conversation, Ashley surprisingly remained calm, as if she was used to such situations. She simply asked Jack to stop being crazy. Ashley confided in her friends about the incident but didn't tell her parents. However, her friends strongly advised her to cut off all contact with Jack. Despite his history of fights and problematic behavior, Ashley and Jack continued to reconcile. At just 18 years old, Ashley had known Jack since her early teens, but she seemed unaware of the extent to which he had manipulated her from a young age. Ashley started working at fast food restaurants and department stores to save money for leisure activities. Her first purchase was a tablet, which allowed her to use social media more privately. She then began saving for a trip. During her senior year of high school, Ashley, a spiritual and inquisitive person, had a profound moment of insight after reading the Book of Mormon. This led her to start following the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Ashley graduated from Sighton High School in 2020. She wanted to experience university life fully, so she decided to take a year-long break before continuing her studies. In the first half of 2021, Ashley continued working in saving money. In April of that year, she was baptized into Mormonism. With her newfound independence and financial stability, Ashley decided to travel to the UK to meet Jack in person and celebrate his birthday with him. Despite her parents' and friends' concerns, Ashley was determined to make the trip, as she was of legal age and had her own savings. Ashley left Canada for the UK on November 12, 2021, on a 6-month tourist visa. This was her first time leaving her homeland, and she was thrilled. The next day, November 13, 2021, Ashley met Jack in person for the first time. On the same day, Ashley updated her profile picture to a photo of them together. At 22 years old, Jack looked significantly older than Ashley, who was 19. His numerous tattoos, including those on his face, created a striking contrast with Ashley's youthful appearance. During her stay in London, Ashley lived with Jack in his house, located in a public housing estate in northwest Chelmsford. The neighborhood had a questionable reputation, but they spent time exploring the nicer areas of the city in Essex. Jack seemed like the same charming and caring person Ashley had met online, often showering her with compliments and taking romantic selfies. However, Jack's behavior was inconsistent, and he could be cruel at times. Despite being together daily, Ashley's tourist visa prevented her from working, and Jack was unemployed, relying on benefits. Occasionally, his mother Tracy, who lived nearby, provided support. Throughout her trip, Ashley regularly posted photos and updates on social media, showcasing their happy moments and romantic experiences. The pictures often featured they embracing, highlighting their seemingly joyful relationship. Ashley kept in regular touch with her family through video calls, and everything seemed fine at first. They even adopted a new kitten, Winston, which was a positive addition to their lives. Nevertheless, over time, Jack started to become more withdrawn and isolated. Ashley's trip to England was supposed to be an exciting adventure, but it quickly turned into a restrictive and isolating experience. Her boyfriend, Jack, had lost interest in exploring the country and instead preferred to stay indoors, smoke, and play video games. As a result, Ashley's options for activities were severely limited, and she was forced to do only what Jack wanted. Before arriving in England, one of Ashley's friends from church had arranged for her to meet some American missionaries who would be in Chelmsford at the same time. Ashley was eager to connect with them, but Jack refused to let her attend church on Sundays. Despite this, she continued to secretly communicate with the missionaries through text messages, deleting the conversations to avoid Jack's suspicion. Ashley's new friends soon realized that Jack was controlling and possibly abusive. When she confided in them about her problems, Ashley admitted that she knew she deserved better, but she was trying to keep Jack happy. However, the abuse went beyond controlling her communication. About 6 weeks into their trip, Jack became violent when he discovered that Ashley had blocked 2 UK phone numbers. He mistakenly believed that the numbers belonged to other men, triggering a jealous outburst. In a disturbing text message to his mother, Jack revealed that he had physically abused Ashley. Ashley created a secret profile where she documented the bruises she had sustained. She confided in her sister Haley about the abuse, but warned her not to tell their mother, fearing that their family would turn against Jack. After Jack overdosed on anti-anxiety medication in late December 2021, Ashley was tasked with overseeing his medication as his caregiver. She kept this responsibility a secret from her mother and friends, but Haley inadvertently revealed the truth. Ashley's mother expressed concern and asked her to return home, but Ashley insisted on staying with Jack until he recovered. In early January 2022, another disturbing incident occurred. Jack smashed a beer glass over Ashley's head, leaving her in tears. While Jack forced her to clean up the broken glass, Ashley contacted her sister via video call, revealing the true extent of her situation. Jack was frantic, pacing back and forth, yelling and grinding his teeth. His distress prompted Ashley to contact her sister, Haley, who urged her to return home. However, Haley's concerns fell on deaf ears. A brief period of calm followed, marked by Jack's 23rd birthday celebration with his family, where everyone put on a united front and pretended everything was fine. In an attempt to diffuse the tension, Jack's mother and stepfather organized a family vacation to a seaside town shortly after. The photos from the trip appeared perfect, showcasing a happy and tranquil Ashley, which brought relief to her parents, who remained unaware of the seriousness of the situation. In late January, an intense argument broke out, and Jack's behavior turned violent once again. He hit Ashley and threw a candle and a TV remote at her while she was video chatting with Haley, who was pleading with her to return home. Although Ashley had initially agreed, she ultimately decided to stay. Despite witnessing Jack's cruel nature, she clung to the hope that the charming person she once knew was still buried deep within him. Ashley was convinced that time, her love, or perhaps medical treatment could help Jack overcome his destructive tendencies, a sentiment that was echoed by her mother during subsequent conversations with Jack. Jack accused Ashley of cheating on him, physically abused her, and later apologized. Despite feeling guilty about his actions, Jack's behavior continued. The situation escalated on the morning of February 1, 2022, when Jack became angry with Ashley again. He accused her of abandoning him and seeing other people in secret. He demanded to see her phone and check her social media accounts to prove his allegations. Around 8 a.m., their neighbor Haley Borton Shaw heard Ashley's screams through the shared wall. Ashley soon showed up at Jack's doorstep, drawing attention to the distressing situation unfolding between them. Haley was shocked and Ashley appeared at her door, barefoot and crying, with a cut on her palm that was bleeding. Ashley explained that Jack had become enraged when he caught her looking at intimate photos of them. He had verbally abused her, physically attacked her, smashed her phone, and thrown her kitten against the wall. Despite Haley's concerns for Ashley's safety and fear that Jack might try to harm her, Ashley asked Haley not to call the police. Haley reluctantly agreed, but begged Ashley to see a doctor instead of returning to Jack's apartment. When Ashley refused, Haley decided to go and talk to Jack herself. During their conversation, Jack apologized for his actions and remained calm. Haley then left for a doctor's appointment around 9 a.m. Meanwhile, Jack's neighbor received a misdelivered package and brought it to his doorstep. Jack was hesitant to answer the door, which wasn't unusual since he was known to be an unfriendly and paranoid person. Around this time, Ashley called her family using Jack's cell phone, informing them of her situation. Ashley's mother was already aware of what was going on because Haley had previously confided in her about Jack's abusive behavior towards Ashley. Ashley's parents immediately bought her a return ticket for February 3rd to escape the abusive relationship. When she informed Jack, he offered to drive her to the airport. However, before she left, Ashley's mother made it clear that if Jack hurt her again, she would contact the police. She also advised Ashley to go straight to the airport if Jack assaulted her again. The conversation between Ashley and her family lasted for 3 hours before they ended the call. It was 11 a.m. in Chelmsford and 3 a.m. in Vernon when the call ended. A short time later, Jack sent a message to his mother, admitting to brutally beating Ashley again. During the assault, Ashley fell to the floor and possibly broke her arm. This violent incident occurred between 11:22 a.m. and 12:38 a.m. Ashley managed to send several messages to her family and friends using Jack's phone, but since it was nighttime, no one responded immediately. She also reached out to her friends at the church in Chelmsford, asking for help and describing the emergency. Unfortunately, these messages were not received until hours later, when it was too late to intervene. Between 12:38 and 12:45, Jack violently attacked Ashley, choking her until she lost consciousness. He then proceeded to the kitchen, retrieved an 11-centimeter knife, and repeatedly stabbed Ashley's chest and stomach around 100 times, ultimately ending her life. Following the attack, Jack updated his social media profile picture with a photo of himself and Ashley, accompanied by the caption, "Always mine." He also recorded a video message for Haley, expressing his love for Ashley, apologizing, and stating that he couldn't let her go, adding that his mental state was unstable. The video, which was never sent, showed Ashley's body next to him. Meanwhile, in Vernon, Ashley's family discovered a large number of messages from her on their phones. They immediately contacted Jamie Ashworth, a family friend from their Mormon community in Chelmsford. Jamie and Tyler Borden, another acquaintance from the church, went to Jack's apartment in England. After knocking on the door and receiving no response, they called the police and left the scene. In a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, Jack texted Ashley's family and friends, pretending to be her. However, the messages from loved ones continued to pour in, and Jack ignored them. Meanwhile, they were frantically trying to reach Ashley. Eventually, Jack called his sister Nadia and confessed to killing Ashley, even going so far as to show her the body. This disturbing conversation took place at approximately 4:13 p.m. When the police arrived at the apartment 10 minutes after Jamie's call, they found that the situation had already turned tragic. They arrested Jack, who was covered in blood, on the spot. He told the officers that he had experienced a psychotic episode and confessed to the crime. As a result, he was taken into custody and sent to Chelmsford Prison. His trial was scheduled for September 7, 2022, at Chelmsford Crown Court. The court's psychiatric examination concluded that Jack was mentally fit to stand trial. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable, including a video recording of him admitting to the crime. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Jack immediately pleaded guilty. The judge then informed him that, given his confession, a life imprisonment sentence was inevitable. At the hearing, which took place under Judge Edward Murray at Chelmsford Crown Court, prosecutor Simon Spence detailed Jack's extensive criminal history, which dated back to his teenage years. During the hearing, Ashley's parents learned the disturbing truth about Jack. Jack had a history of run-ins with the law, including arrests for stalking, kidnapping, and violent assault. He had also been issued multiple restraining orders, including against his mother and former girlfriend. The revelation of Jack's extensive criminal record shocked and devastated Ashley's parents, who had never suspected the true nature of the man who had taken their daughter's life. During the hearing, the prosecution and defense discussed a letter written by Jack from prison, in which he apologized for his actions. The letter was later released to the media by Judge Murray, who cited the importance of transparency in the justice system. In the letter, Jack expressed regret to Ashley's family, especially her mother and sister Haley, acknowledging that nothing could undo the harm he had caused. Jack accepted responsibility for his actions and acknowledged that his mental state contributed to the tragedy. He also claimed to have previously discussed his mental health with Ashley. Ultimately, Jack was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. The case of Jessica Paget. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania, where she spent her entire life. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. However, her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was young. Her mother later remarried, and Jessica formed a close bond with her stepfather, whom she considered her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, Jessica attended college to study preschool education. It was during this time that she met her future husband, Michael Paget. They began dating, moved in together, and had 2 children over the course of their 8-year relationship. Although they didn't get married until August 2014, Michael was a caring father and husband. However, like any family, they experienced ups and downs in their relationship. Jessica was happy with Michael, but just 4 months after their wedding, she vanished. Before her disappearance, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. She loved her job, as she was passionate about working with children and had a natural ability to connect with them. The children adored her, and she enjoyed spending time with them. On November 21, 2014, Jessica dropped off her older children at school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten. It was a typical day, with no indication of the trouble that was to come. Jessica asked her administrator if she could take a short break from work to send a fax to her mother's house in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator agreed, and Jessica left her son at kindergarten before driving to her mother's house. She was expected to return to work within 30 minutes, but an hour passed and she didn't come back. Her colleagues tried calling her, but she didn't answer. When Jessica failed to return, the kindergarten administrator contacted her husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she was. Michael said he was at work and hadn't heard from her. He tried calling her, but all his calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Jessica as she always answered calls from her family. Michael then called his mother-in-law, Danelle, who was in Florida, to see if Jessica had contacted her. However, Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day and was immediately worried. She suggested that Michael call her husband, Greg, who was Jessica's stepfather, to see if he had any information. However, Greg reported that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jessica that day. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica's relatives grew increasingly worried. After numerous failed attempts to contact her, Danelle took a flight to Pennsylvania to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, for hours after Jessica disappeared from work, her husband Michael reported her missing to the police. He expressed his concern that Jessica would never leave their children voluntarily, leading him to fear the worst. The police promptly launched an investigation, distributing Jessica's description to all nearby stations. She was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 130 pounds, with a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with the words "Duck, Duck, Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. A thorough search of local hospitals and morgues yielded no results. Detectives worked to determine Jessica's whereabouts, interviewing her co-workers in the process. However, everyone they spoke to reported that Jessica had no enemies and was well liked by her colleagues, children, and their parents. According to her co-workers, Jessica seemed fine when she left work at lunchtime, and they noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, the police were able to locate her phone signal, which indicated that it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data was not entirely accurate due to inherent location determination errors, it provided a general area for the police to focus their search. However, by the time they began searching, it was already nighttime. The police found Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, in a nearby parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked and empty, with her purse, documents, and bank card still inside. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone was on the passenger seat next to her purse. There were no signs of a crime in the car, leaving the police with several unanswered questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? To answer these questions, the police sought CCTV footage. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street had captured the area where Jessica's car was found. After reviewing the footage with the store manager, the police saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m. She got out of the car and stood by the driver's door for a short time before leaving and not returning. The investigators were baffled by Jessica's disappearance, as she had left behind her documents, phone, and keys. It was unclear whether she had intentionally gone into hiding. Surveillance footage showed Jessica walking between two buildings towards another parking lot, where she vanished from view due to the lack of cameras. To get a better look at the footage, the investigators made a copy of the video to review on a larger screen at the police station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, enlisted the help of the Pennsylvania State Police to coordinate a search effort. Flyers with Jessica's photo were distributed throughout Northampton and surrounding cities, as well as shared on social media and through local news outlets. State police detectives began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff, who revealed that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house. The detectives then visited the house, which was approximately 4 miles from the kindergarten, in search of answers. The detectives met with Danelle and her husband Greg at the scene and learned that Jessica had keys to their home and could visit at any time. On the day of her disappearance, both Danelle and Greg had been out, Danelle in Florida and Greg elsewhere, which left uncertainty about Jessica's activities at the house. They also checked Greg's fax machine for records of usage, but found that the device was faulty, which didn't provide any clear information. Jessica might have used another fax machine, but it still didn't explain why she had left her belongings in her car. The detectives decided to speak with Jessica's husband Michael, as husbands are often suspects in such cases. To confirm Michael's story that he was the first to leave the house on the day Jessica disappeared, detectives investigated his claim. It was a possibility they couldn't rule out, as statistically, a significant number of disappearances involve a partner. As they continued the investigation, the police arranged a search party, and local media alerted the public about Jessica's disappearance. Anyone with information was asked to come forward. By this point, 48 hours had passed, but no new leads emerged on Jessica's journey to her mother's house. To aid in their investigation, detectives scoured the route to her mother's house for surveillance cameras. One key location, an Exxon gas station adjacent to the main road leading to the mother's residence, had multiple cameras installed. Given the fact that this gas station was strategically situated on Jessica's stated route, the police logically inferred that if Jessica drove in the direction she said, she would be captured on camera. A review of the recording showed that her car was, indeed, captured driving by at approximately 12:56 p.m. From there, the journey to her mother's house took just a few minutes, suggesting Jessica would need to make the short trip back in order to utilize a functional fax machine, which wasn't operational at her mother's home. While fast-forwarding the tape to find a shot of the vehicle's potential return, detectives made a perplexing observation. The footage shows Jessica's white car speeding through a gas station just 14 minutes later. Notably, the car took a peculiar route, turning towards the gas station and continuing onto the other side without stopping, before heading towards the city center, where the car was later abandoned in a parking lot. Given her rapid pace, the likely reason for this unusual detour was a red traffic light at the intersection, which Jessica may have attempted to avoid by cutting through the gas station. From there, she drove onto a different road where the light was green and eventually left her car in the parking lot, where a police officer discovered it later. However, a surprising detail emerged upon closer inspection of the footage. Jessica, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 130 pounds, appeared to be much shorter and lighter than the person seen exiting her car. Measuring against the known height of the car, experts estimated that this person stood between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches tall. Moreover, during their examination of the abandoned car, the police noticed that the driver's seat was pushed forward, which would make it uncomfortable for someone taller than 5 feet 11 inches to operate the vehicle comfortably. The police initially found it suspicious that the driver's seat was positioned for someone of Jessica's height. However, after reviewing the footage, they discovered that the person who got out of the car had adjusted the seat to its most forward position, attempting to make it seem like Jessica was driving. But this raised another question: who was the tall person seen in the footage? Michael. He stood at around 6 feet tall. The police brought him in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives verified his alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. The evidence confirmed that Michael was indeed at work at the time, which meant the person in the footage was not him. For days had passed since Jessica's disappearance, and her children were struggling to cope with the stress and uncertainty. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no leads had been found. Investigators re-examined the footage of someone exiting Jessica's car, but the person's identity remained a mystery. However, upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a detail they had previously missed. A minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, left the scene. This new information led the police to Greg, Jessica's stepfather, who matched the suspect's height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police requested that Greg come to the station for questioning, leaving him shocked and dismayed to be considered a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. Greg claimed that he had left his car at a service center for repairs and that a neighbor had given him a ride there to pick it up. He then stated that he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat. However, the police obtained CCTV footage from the gas station, which showed Greg driving past the station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. It turned out that Greg had lied about stopping at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Greg's entire story was fabricated. His neighbor denied driving him to the service center, contradicting Greg's claim. This led detectives to suspect that Greg might have been involved in Jessica's disappearance. By piecing together the evidence, investigators concluded that Greg was likely at home when Jessica arrived. It's possible that something happened, and Greg drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center. The police searched Greg's house, where they found evidence that contradicted his alibi. The fax machine, which Greg claimed was not working, was found to be functional, and its usage history showed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day of her disappearance. Furthermore, a trash can in the basement contained napkins with bloodstains, and Greg's shoes, which were found in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them. Donnell reported to the police that Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day before, which seemed unusual at the time, especially since the trash can wasn't full. In hindsight, this could be how Greg disposed of evidence related to cleaning products and rags used in the house. During a second interrogation, the police confronted Greg, stating that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found evidence in his home. They also informed him that they were aware Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. Greg then began to talk. Greg claimed that when he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st, he found Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. He alleged that Jessica was already dead when he arrived and that he panicked, fearing no one would believe him. He supposedly drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot and then returned home. Greg also stated that Jessica had outstanding debts, which he claimed led to her death. However, detectives later discovered that this was another lie, and they found evidence that Greg had purchased adult toys the day before Jessica disappeared. The investigators were fed up with Greg's inconsistent stories, so they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter Jessica's body, explaining that an autopsy would provide answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Greg changed his story again. This time, he claimed he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked to send a fax. According to Greg, he was standing behind her as she used the computer, and he became aroused and developed a desire for his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he allegedly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he moved Jessica's body to the bedroom. Greg then drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center, where he had previously left his Ford for repairs. To mislead investigators, he adjusted the seat to make it appear as though Jessica was driving. What Greg said next shocked the investigators. After returning home, he set up a video camera near the bed and recorded a video of himself with Jessica's body. The police later found this disturbing video on Greg's computer. Greg confessed to wrapping his stepdaughter Jessica's body in a blanket and hiding it in a ravine near his home. He claimed he was not a bad person, but had lost control. After the crime, Greg's life fell apart. He lost his business, home, dogs, and wife. However, he never mentioned the loss of Jessica. Jessica's mother, Danelle, was shocked to discover that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible. The authorities announced Jessica's death, stating that she was a victim of homicide. The district attorney, John Morganelli, expressed skepticism about Greg's version of events, but believed there was a sexual motive behind the crime. The prosecutor's office examined the evidence to determine if Greg had planned the attack. Jessica's family released a statement thanking law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. They described Jessica as a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was loved by her family and friends, and stated that her loss made the world a darker place. Gregory Gregg, 53, was charged with the murder of Jessica Padette. Initially, investigators suspected that Greg had tried to persuade Jessica into a romantic encounter, but when she refused, he killed her to avoid exposure. However, this theory was difficult to prove due to the lack of defensive wounds on Jessica's body. She died from a single wound to the back of her head, which corroborated Greg's testimony. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty, but since Jessica was already dead when he committed the second part of the crime, the prosecution could not pursue the death penalty. An examination of Greg and Jessica's computers and phones revealed no evidence of a relationship beyond that of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli noted that Greg's lawyer, John McMahon Jr., failed to submit the results of a mental health evaluation for Greg. McMahon claimed that he had Greg evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation found that Greg did not have a diminished mental capacity, so McMahon did not use it in the trial. During the trial, the jury was forced to watch a disturbing 6-minute video that Greg had recorded, which showed him committing heinous crimes using adult toys he had purchased the day before. The jury was reluctant to view the video, but the judge ruled that they were obligated to watch it before reaching a verdict. Greg's lawyer argued that the crime was not premeditated and that his client should be charged with a third-degree crime rather than a first-degree crime. In response, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli presented the video as evidence to prove that the crime was, in fact, premeditated. Morganelli explained that this was necessary to convince the jurors of Greg's guilt, despite the disturbing nature of the footage. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes, finding Gregory Gregg guilty of taking Jessica's life and desecrating her body. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he had any final words, Greg simply replied, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." Following the sentencing, the judge advised the jurors to seek counseling from a psychologist to cope with the traumatic case. Jessica's husband, Michael, spoke to reporters, expressing the difficulty of moving on without his beloved wife and raising their 3 children alone. He described Jessica as the most wonderful person he had ever met. In a separate matter, Danelle, Greg's wife, has initiated divorce proceedings. However, the process is proving to be complex and Greg is hindering her efforts.